turn it off. That's me. Hang on just a second.
That's good to have the reminder.
Jeez. If there's anybody in the audience that wants to address the commission on an agenda item, there's a blue sheet up there outside, I think. Robin should be around here momentarily, I believe. And fill that out, and they'll get it to us, and we'll make sure that you get a chance to address the commission on that agenda item, and we will have a call to the public at the end of this meeting this morning. And with that said, please do not turn, you folks out there, turn to your right and stare at Rennie's tie because you'll get dizzy. For those up here looking left, so don't stare at that tie. And with that, Jean, you're up.
Good morning, President Plata, members of the Commission, and Director Talbot. This morning for agenda item number 16, which is the appointment of licensing agents. The department has received 2 applications from 2 businesses that would like to become licensed agents for the department: Gary's Gun Shop in Torrington and Flat Creek Inn in Jackson, Wyoming. The application from Gary's Gun Shop was submitted as a sporting goods store. And I have to tell you that Jennifer Charlie, our licensed accounting coordinator, who does all the agent management for our vendors, was very, very happy to receive this request from Gary's Gun Shop in Torrington. We have a really hard time keeping vendors in that area for some reason, so she was very excited to see this application come to the department. The local game warden did do a visit to the business, and they do qualify as a sporting goods store. They're open year-round, 9 to 5. They're closed on Sundays, and the department would like to recommend appointment of this vendor for the department to sell licenses. The other application came from Flat Creek Inn, located in Jackson. And as the commission, I'm sure, is well aware, we have many agents in the Jackson area, and they applied as a non-sporting goods store. So through regulations, we are required to determine if there's a need for an additional agent in a town when they apply as a non-sporting goods store. So we had quite a conversation with the local game warden, Kyle Lash, in the area. And based on our conversations with him, because they are located right by the National Elk Refuge, and they do have extended hours, and the only other store in the area is clear across the other side of Jackson, we agreed to go ahead and advertise for this vacancy in Jackson and receive this 1 application. So the department would like to recommend the appointment of Flat Creek Inn as a licensed agent. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for Jean? Before we vote, anybody in the audience want to address either one of these new applications? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I probably should know this. Do these people put up a bond?
President Plata, Commissioner Anselmo, requirements by state statute are every agent must pay a bond to the department of $50, and that bond is just deposited into an account with the department, and we're required to maintain a balance of, is it 100,000, Meredith? And that money in that account is only to be used by the department to recover any lost of uncollectible accounts. So the department goes to every effort to collect any unpaid balances from an agent. And our policy is if the balance is less than $3,000, we turn it to collections. If it's over $3,000, we'll turn it over to our Attorney General representative for formal action through court order. So that bond is just put into a pooled account, and it's only for the department to use for unrecoverable debt. And it's an annual payment they're required to pay every year.
So I just see this guy from Jackson. The mailing address is American Fork, Utah. Do you do credit checks or anything on any of these people, or you just, I mean, okay, he's been in business. I know you can't spend a lot of time checking everybody out.
President Claudia, Commissioner Anselmi, the only things that we're required to do by state statute is to verify that they are a business registered with the Secretary of State and they hold a valid sales tax license in Wyoming. We don't do any credit checks.
Okay, as long as we're on the subject, excuse me. That Alco deal, this is off the subject, but so that gets sent to the Attorney General and they try to collect those bad debts in.
President Claudia, Commissioner Anselmi, that's correct. Our Jennifer Charlie, again, our licensed coordinator for all of our accounting, she does several contacts through certified letters and also working through corporate offices if necessary, for example, ALCO. and makes every effort on our part to collect the debt before we involve the collection agency or the Attorney General.
Thank you.
Anybody else? No one from the audience? We'll just do both of these at the same time, or would you want to separate them?
Mr. President, I would move to approve both applications.
Okay.
I'll second it.
With that, Sherry? Thank you. All right, call for the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
President Platte, members of the Commission, Director Talbot, agenda item number 17 is the renewal of licensed selling agents. As you are aware, every year on December the 1st, by state statute, licensed agents must reapply to the Commission to continue their sales into the next calendar year. And every year we have a few agents that are late in meeting that December 1 deadline. And the policy with the Commission is that they must reapply to the department to continue their sales if they've missed that December 1 date. And we had 3 businesses this year that their applications were received a few days after December 1, and so we're asking you today to allow these 3 vendors, Alcova Lakeside Marina, located in Alcova, North Fork Anglers in Cody, and Shopco, located in Newcastle, to continue their license sales for the department and accept their late application of their bond payment.
Questions for Gene?
President Clark.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll make the motion that we accept Gene's recommendation.
Okay.
Second that.
Okay. Anyone from the audience want to address these 3 vendors? Call for the question. All those in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
Easy. Mary? Good morning. Where's Larry at?
He found a permanent home.
Oh, good for him.
Yes, he is in a good home. Thank you. President Claudia, members of the Commission, Director, what I'd like to do today is just kind of walk through the data call, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife data call on sage grouse. Wyoming Game and Fish Department was responsible for submitting the data call on October 31st, 2014. It was about a 500-page submittal. Right now, the Fish and Wildlife Service is going through all the data submitted by over 11 states. We have over 7,000 entries and just volumes and volumes. Currently, the Fish and Wildlife Service is going to enter all this data into models and try to figure out if the threats have been ameliorated by the states. So this is just a summary of what the states were asked to submit officially, and it's population, status, trends, numbers, habitat status, disease and predation, other factors, and conservation efforts. So we've provided all of that. In addition, we wanted to also look, the Fish and Wildlife Service had given us other things that they said that they were going to look at. One is they were going to measure all the data against the Conservation Objective Team report. And I'll go through those factors that are in that report very quickly, but I'll go through them. And then there's the 5 factors for listing. And there's also what they call the peace policy. So we can have all the plans in the world, but what they want to evaluate is, are those plans likely to be implemented? Are they likely to be funded? Are they likely to be effective? So those are the other things that they considered, and we provided information for those 3 as well. So the COT report, it was a group of people, scientists as well as policy folks, and the number 1 objective is stop population declines, stop the bleeding, habitat loss. Have we done that? Implement the targeted habitat management and restoration, develop and implement state and federal sage-grouse conservation strategies. And just about all the states, all 11 states, have a plan. There's 4 or 5 of them that are still waiting for an executive order, but they should have an executive order by June, which is the cutoff time primarily for the service to make their decision. Develop and implement proactive voluntary conservation actions, and then develop and implement monitoring plans and prioritize, fund, and implement research. So the 5 factors of a listing decision, number 1 is damage to and destruction of a species habitat. And our primary threat for that is energy development. Some of the other states, the damage is wildfire and cheatgrass. overutilization that really hasn't been a factor in any of the states, disease or predation. There's an argument at the field level about the role that predation actually takes out of the population. Inadequacy of existing protection. That's our executive order. We have a very strong one. We have a track record of implementing it for 5 years. The other states don't have that same track record. So they're trying to prove that they are capable of doing that protection. And then other natural and man-made factors. So this is the peace policy, the policy for the evaluation of conservation efforts. I'm not going to bore you and go through them, but there's 15 questions. And what it comes down to is, if you have all these great plans and strategies, what is the likelihood of actually achieving the intended benefits? And that's what all those questions go through. Where's your funding coming from? Who's going to do it? Do you have your partners? Do you have the authorization? Those type of things. So because we have a track record, we don't have to deal with the peace policy as much. We've been able to prove that we can actually implement the sage-grouse executive order. So Wyoming's goal in providing the information to the Fish and Wildlife Service was we first wanted to know, were we successful? Are we winning or losing the game inside our core areas? Are we able to manage enough development and offset it with conservation to have either stop the bleeding or actually improve the habitat that's happening? And then we wanted to make sure that we told our story, because you can give folks lots of numbers and numbers get spun. We wanted to make sure that we told our story, Wyoming's story. We have been collecting existing data for a long time with our DDCT, and you saw a presentation earlier about that. We were missing and are still missing NRCS data, the Thunder Basin grassland, and some of the PAW data, but we are hoping to get all that data and update our report once more in June for the Fish and Wildlife Service. So we have the entire story, core area by core area. And part of the reason we didn't have the data is NRCS cannot provide detailed data at even a township level. They have to provide it at county level. We were hoping to get it at a core level. So we're still negotiating that out. Thunder Basin grassland, there was just a miscue. They didn't have their data ready by the time we needed to submit, and the same thing with Petroleum Association. But we will get that data. So what we found is that we do have a solid running history of adaptive management. Was the SGEO, the executive order, perfect at the outset? Nope. Within 30 days of signature, there were things that had to be corrected, and that's why we had 2 executive orders under Governor Freudenthal. We had an updated one under Governor Mead, and Governor Mead is now asking the sage-grouse implementation team to take a look once again and make the improvements based on the information we found. We also have an incredible knowledge of bird locations in terms of collaring individual birds and knowing where the leks are at, where the habitat is at. We're probably the state that has the most significant abundance of information. And there have been vigorous conservation efforts. I mean, the conservation districts have done a tremendous job. Our agency has done a great job. Private landowners are stepping up with candidate conservation agreements. It's incredible. When you take a look at the conservation effort across these 11 states, and especially Wyoming, it's incredible. So we did talk about population trends, and Tom Christensen and Nissa Whitford did a tremendous job at putting that data together, and I believe this is just redundant of the data you've seen before. So I'll just kind of go through. We're trending up a little bit. We think our low is not as low as it had been in the past, but it looks like we are trending up. So habitat trends. How do we figure out if we're winning or losing in habitat? So I hate accounting, but we had to use accounting. So we're looking at the debits and credits in each, by threat, in each core area as outlined in the COT. So again, the COT objectives are stop the population declines and develop and implement state federal conservation strategies. Okay, you don't need to look at this very in detail. But what we did is since 2012, we went back and looked at every single permit that was done by every single agency in core area in Wyoming. We had, I can't read it either, but I think 234 energy mining infrastructure DDCTs inside those core areas. And the core areas are on the left column. Out of the 234, we had 105 non-compliant projects. That doesn't look good, right? So what happened with those non-compliant projects? Those non-compliant projects were a result of existing disturbance. They did not add disturbance. Through the work that the BLM, the Forest Service, HPP, the tremendous crew that I work with, you look at the next column, only 26 additional disturbance acres of non-compliance were added out of that 105 projects. And those were APDs, well sightings, whatever, roads. Only 26 acres were added out of those 105. So we were able to push all those 105 non-compliant into existing disturbance and not add any additional acres. So that's pretty good. And what are we doing about as we move forward? As we work with those non-compliant projects, the other thing that we're asking them to do, so let's say there's an abandoned well. We're asking them to reclaim that. We're asking to get that compliance so that it comes up. So next time go around, when they ask for another APD, we should be able to push it more into compliance. So more COT objectives. Again, targeted habitat management. Random acts of conservation is what a lot of the effort was called prior to the executive order. Right now there's a targeted effort. Where can we put the money? Where can we do the work to do the most good for the birds? And of course we want to monitor. We also looked at leases. So 15 out of the 31 core areas have easements, private land easements. They range for the private surface inside those core areas. 0 to 95% of the private surface within core is protected. So in the Jackson Hole core area, 95% of the private land is protected with an easement against development. That's huge. So the rest of it is federal land or state land, and that's protected. So there's 5% that's unprotected inside the Jackson core.
Mary, easement? What do you mean by easement?
Conservation easements
Oh, okay.
against development. Yeah, sorry, conservation easements. Thank you. All right, so then we also wanted to look, and I'll just talk in general about this, is we wanted to figure out the habitat improvement. We're tracking fires from 1995. There's a lot of acres of fires out there, both prescribed and natural, and we want to know if that's returned back to suitable. We had, I think it says 168,000 acres have been returned out of the original amount back to suitable. We also had 1.3 million acres in Wyoming since 2012 that have been treated, have some type of improvement activity on either private, state, or federal land. That's a huge amount. Okay, we also wanted to prioritize, fund, and implement research. So there's 60 of them there, and you don't have to read these as either. But there are over 60 projects that are currently or have been since 2012 completed regarding sage grouse habitat, predation, disease, all those type of things. There is a robust current activity of research that's taking place in Wyoming that will inform us for this 2015 new SGEO rollout. Okay, so what we tried to do to tell our story is that we went through core area by core area. We wanted to know what zone it was in, how many acres are in the area, the percentage of the core of Wyoming's core area that's actually in that core area, and the percentage of birds that's captured. So for instance, in the buffalo core area, 1.9% of all the core area birds are in the buffalo core area. Not a lot, but it's a significant corner and part of migration. We know that occupied leks. We also wanted to know, and this is what's really important, is because that regulatory mechanism, so who owns the surface and who owns the minerals? And where is the leasing going? What's the threat? Because remember, energy development is the biggest threat for Wyoming sage grouse habitat. So we did go through and figure out who owns the surface and who owns the subsurface. Okay, and this is just colorful. So then we ran it across the threats. So there are, I think, 13 threats. They're on the left side. The COT report, the Conservation Objective Team report, went through and said, okay, agricultural agriculture is a threat, not in Buffalo. It's green. Conversion is not a threat. Annual grasses and weeds is a threat. It's not a major threat. That's in yellow. And then we have energy development in red. We went across and ran through and got all the data we knew for debits and credits for each of those threats. And what we're trying to do is, in June, is continue to feed this database to show that we have the threats. Number one, we know what the threats are, we know how much is occurring, and if we have it under control. And on the right side, then we have the conservation piece and what kind of activities took place. Were there conservation easements? Were there reclamation activities? Those types of things. So it's a matrix. It's a huge matrix, and we had to work with all kinds of agencies. So with that, that's the summary. But the good news is that even though we had 105 non-compliant DDCTs, through that we were able to show that we're gaining ground. So you don't, in all the core areas, you don't see any red. You see yellow. Status quo. We were able to maintain the status quo, or we were able to improve it. And we're going to be tracking this through every year with every state agency and every federal agency to figure out their conservation efforts and their development credits. So we should be able to tell the story to the court, regardless of what side we are on in the court. So that's it. Thank you.
Any questions for Mary?
President Clowney. Back to the second or third slide, you had 4 or 5 things you do. How did you come up with habitat status and trends? Was that through the NRCS giving the info, or how did you present all that?
What we did is we contacted every agency and asked for their shape files. Either what activities are you doing? NRCS is one. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does some work. Forest Service, BLM, our folks, conservation districts, private landowners. We talked to everybody to try to get those shape files.
And it's NRCS and somebody else that's dragging their feet that you haven't got yet with the Forest Service, is that right?
Yes. And we're working with them.
Are you working with them with an idea in the future that they're going to comply, or are they just, do they care?
They care. They care. they care. And, but the coordination with the Forest Service is a bit tricky, and you got to find the right person who's willing to share the data. But yes, what we're hoping to do, and in fact we have an AWAC right now, thanks to John Kennedy, that is compiling all this data, and we're hoping that we don't have to chase it, that we'll get it coming in quarterly and we can analyze it on a quarterly basis. It's a good story, though. It's important to have the data, because if we don't have it, we can't tell the story.
Mr. President. Mary, this listing decision is due when? You said
September
June?
2015.
September. Okay. I don't know if this is a fair question to ask you, but what is the criteria for a regional listing versus a nationwide listing?
You have to have this.
You can't do it.
Yeah, you can't. It's going to be
illegal now.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. President.
There
is no regional listing. You either list the species in its entire range or you don't list it at all. We lost the court case on the grizzly bear started that, but they made a decision the same way on trebles, where they had to list it in Wyoming, remember, and left it listed in Colorado, and courts found that was not correct.
And yet they're looking at a regional delisting on the grizzly bear.
That's a different issue with the EPS.
Mr. President, members of the commission, the other part is the governor's office is working strongly with these other states to make sure that they at least have plans that are comparable. They're also working with the BLM and the Forest Service to make sure they have plans, because this range-wide issue is so huge. You can't have different, you got to have a common denominator.
Have you seen any of the other states' data?
I've seen some.
You can't look anywhere close to this.
No.
So, I think the problem is we're looking at the best set of data that the service sees, and there's 11 states involved. I think that's the big concern. Wyoming is probably going to come out smelling like a rose. Our neighbors. Don't know.
Mr. President, and that's where the peace policy comes in, because they haven't done the implementation. They're just getting their ink dry on their plans. So it's a promise that they're going to do it.
How come PAW hasn't provided their stuff, Mary? What's the hang up there, you know?
But we got a part of it. We got as much as we could. Part of it was that it was still coming in after our deadline. The companies were.
We need to prod them a little bit. They need prodding.
I think we're on a roll now. I think now that we've got everybody.
You don't want me to
comfortable.
call them.
Hmm?
You don't want me to call them.
I think we're fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else for Mary? On the excuse me, on the DDC results, South Rollins and Douglas had the most for the highest numbers.
Mhm.
I'm assuming Douglas or North, probably Douglas would be energy development. I'm
Yes.
assuming. And South Rollins, I'm assuming, is this choke cherry thing. Would that be a fair statement?
Mr. President, no, it was actually there's a lot of agriculture and there's been a lot of fires down there. So the fires made up a lot of the disturbance.
Richard, most of choke cherry is outside of core. They redefined the core boundary and drew choke cherry out.
That's right, because they're not going to put those 3 wind turbines out there, right?
That's correct.
Thanks for that. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
Kurt?
Morning, Mr. President, members of the Commission, Director Talbot. We have 2 fish presentations in a row here. Just wanted to introduce the presenters. First will be Matt Hahn, who's a fisheries biologist in Casper region, who has I think, a very interesting and fun story to tell. So, here's Matt.
Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Commission, Director Talbot. It's my honor to present to you today one of the great success stories of fisheries management in our state, probably in the last 100 years. and that is the transformation that's happened on the North Platte River near Casper, mostly due to the program that's a cooperative effort between the Game and Fish Department and the Bureau of Reclamation, and that is to provide flushing flows to the river to maintain trout spawning habitat. And I apologize for my voice. I'm trying to fight off a cold right now. So
Well, hugs for you.
Just to kind of orient everybody with that maybe not familiar with this location, what we call the Gray Reef reach of the North Platte River begins at Gray Reef Dam, which is about 30 miles southwest of Casper, and the reach extends approximately 87 miles downstream to just below Glen Rock. Now, this became a tailwater stretch of river, meaning it's influenced by an upstream dam in 1909 when Pathfinder Reservoir was completed. And a second dam was built just downstream in 1938 at Alcoba. A typical hydrograph for the North Platte below Pathfinder from the period from 1910 until 1960 was that it was managed 100% for irrigation flows. That is, the water was completely shut off during the winter time, zero flow coming out of the dam. And when irrigation season came around, the flows would be ramped up and down pretty drastically throughout the summer, depending on the demand for water down near Torrington and into Nebraska. You would have peak irrigation delivery usually in August of 5,000 to 6,000 CFS, and then a rapid shut-off again mid-September when irrigation season. As you can imagine, that was a pretty hostile environment for trout or really any fish. Annual trout stocking in this stretch of river began in 1936, and it really was a very marginal fishery during this period of time due to the flow regime in the river. There's essentially no overwinter survival of those stocked trout. A Gray Reef Dam was built in 1961, and it's just downstream of Alcoba. And the reason it was constructed was to allow the Bureau to provide a constant minimum flow of at least 330 CFS. And that was to satisfy some downstream water rights, the towns of Glen Rock and Douglas, and then also for pollution abatement. This period of time, there was a lot of petroleum seeping into the river around the refineries in Casper. It was causing some pretty serious water quality problems downstream. Now, obviously with a minimum flow, the fishery did improve some after 1961. There was improved overwinter survival of the fish, and in '64, the stocking shifted from a catchable program, which was stocking about 8-inch sized fish, down to they could stock fingerling sized rainbows, stock them a much smaller size and let them grow up in the river. Some of the earliest sampling that was done by the fisheries biologists at the time was in 1969, and they were out there dragging seines around. This kind of predates our electrofishing technology that we use today. So they were out seining, trying to determine if any of these fish that were being stocked were actually reproducing. And what they found was that they were not. All the fish that were in the river were the result of stocking. There's really no natural reproduction happening. And 1973 was the first creel survey that was conducted on the river. And they measured a rainbow trout catch rate of 0.4 fish per hour, which is really pretty marginal in terms of the catch rate. The average size of a harvested fish was a little over 13 inches, which is not really all that impressive for a tailwater river. And they measured about 7,700 angler days, which is actually a fairly low number when you consider this period of time. Just upstream at Alcova Reservoir was sustaining over 50,000 angler days. So all of that evidence really points to a pretty mediocre fishery. In 1980, the first population estimate was conducted on the river, and they measured about 1,500 trout per mile. And again, there's really no evidence of any natural reproduction occurring. And they pretty much were able to point their finger to the problem was the just tremendous amounts of really fine silt that was building up in the river. And here's an example. This is a photo taken in 2009. This is a pretty typical tributary stream to this reach of river, aptly named Washout Creek. You can see the large delta that's formed where the stream meets the river channel. This is on our Lusby public fishing area, and the amount of sediment coming down these drainages just exceeds the river's ability to route that sediment out of the system. So it forms these large deltas and then just really chokes the channel full of silt. And one of the underlying problem behind a lot of this is when you get into the uplands, you can see that just cavernous head cut up there. There's just hundreds of those in all these drainages, especially the ones that come in from the east. In 1983 and 1984, there were some very high water years on the Platte. Good snowpack, the reservoirs upstream filled, water ran over the spillway, and the river got some of the highest flows it's seen in over 100 years. You had summer flows in excess of 8,000 CFS for several months in duration. You compare that to the blue line, which is a typical hydrograph for that reach of river after Gray Reef Dam was constructed, where you'd see peak flows of around 2,300 CFS. And those high flows removed all those years of the accumulated fine sediment, and the true potential of what this river was capable of producing was pretty obvious, where you had this. You went from the background population of about 1,500 trout per mile in 1980 that was sustained solely through stocking, and now all of a sudden the population jumped to over 14,000 fish per mile, which is it's just an unbelievably high number for that size of the system. You just don't see population numbers like that anywhere, really. Over the next 10 years, of course, Wyoming being what it is, went back into more of a normal water conditions, and without those high flows, all the fine sediment began accumulating in the channel again, and the population estimates really show an exponential decline in that fish population. It only took about 2 years to effectively negate the benefits of those several years of high flows. So in 1991, my predecessors in Casper began to kind of kick around the idea of, hey, can we mimic what we saw in the mid-'80s? And so they approached the Bureau of Reclamation, who controls the water flow in the river, to see if they would be interested in exploring this. And this is where really a lot of credit has to go to the Bureau of Reclamation and the longtime area manager, John Lawson in particular, because in this period of time, this was something that was completely outside their box. This is just, you didn't do stuff like this. But they were more than happy to work with the department and investigate the feasibility of trying to mimic this. And so they set up a two-phase project run through the University of Wyoming with a couple of graduate students. And the first phase of the project was to measure the baseline conditions that exist in the river at that time, and then use some mathematical modeling to look at what are these different levels of flow might do for the spawning habitat. And then the second phase of the project was to actually use the recommendations from the first study and then set up a series of test flows to evaluate the effectiveness of that. Now, the conclusions from the first phase of the study was that the trout are actually spawning in the river, they're just not doing it successfully. And they measured basically the quality of the spawning habitat within the actual trout redds or the nests where they lay their eggs is called the Friedel index, and they measured a value of 3.4. And what that means, the Friedel index, when you have a value of greater than 10, it's really high quality spawning habitat. When you get down below a value of 5, it's really pretty poor spawning habitat. And when you start looking at values like a 3.4, it's just abysmal spawning habitat. And this is taken within the trout red where the fish has actually done some cleaning of the gravel. So, it's just terrible shape. The second thing that they determined was that the normal summer flow of 2300 CFS is just not enough water to move any of the sediment downstream. And finally, through the modeling they did, they realized, okay, it's going to take about a 4,000 CFS flow before we're going to see any benefit. So the Bureau of Reclamation set up a pair of test flushing flows, 4,000 CFS, and they looked at the response of the river, and they determined that, yeah, 4,000 CFS certainly moves a lot of fine sediment out. As that sediment decreases in the spawning areas, the average size of your spawning gravel increases, which is what they were looking for, and they determined that a 15-hour duration at 4,000 CFS should result in pretty appreciable improvement to the spawning habitat. So based on that, the Bureau of Reclamation agreed to start providing these flushing flows. The department at the time requested 2 separate 15-hour duration flows. Unfortunately, the 6 hours is the maximum that can be delivered by the Bureau without losing generation capacity, and that has to do with their ability to move water through the Alcova power plant along with the volume of Gray Reef Reservoir. So when you're running 4,000 CFS, they've got 6 hours max before they have to start routing water around the power plant, in which case they're not allowed to do that because they're losing that electricity basically. So through some negotiation, they basically settled on a 5-day treatment. You can do 6 hours at a time, do it 5 days in a row. That gets you your 30 hours. And that is basically what's been requested since that time, is that same 5-cycle flush. So the first prescribed flows happened in the fall of 1995. Seemed to be pretty successful, so it was repeated again in the spring. The Bureau determined that basically the flushing flow, delivering these flows was really not causing anybody any heartburn or anything over it. So they said, yeah, this is going to work. So they've been requested every year since then by us. And the benefits of doing these flows were pretty quickly evident. You can see the population goes from a fairly low level, and then all of a sudden it jumps up after these flushing flows were started. And the magnitude of increase was not as much as you saw with the really high flows in those big water years, but it was considerable improvement nonetheless. It was good enough that in 2001 we decided that natural reproduction in this stretch of river is sufficient. We don't need to stock anymore, and we made a management change from being a stocked fishery to just wild trout management. Just kind of let them do their thing. So everything was cooking along, we thought, really good. And then in 2008, we started seeing some kind of alarming trends in our data. And in particular, we were looking at your individual year class production or the number of age 1 fish in the river at any given time as an index to the previous year's spawning success, we started to see some pretty drastic declines over this 10-year period. Started off looking really good, but then every successive time we measured it, we saw, okay, we're losing reproduction every year. And finally, you can see in 2009, it really started to go downhill on us. So we were essentially able to rule out any kind of angling pressure as the cause behind that. This is, we're seeing declines in the number of small fish that weren't even legal to harvest. So we started investigating what's going on in the spawning gravel itself, and comparing the substrate prior to the flushing flow versus after the flushing flow. And what we determined from all that sampling was that this 5-cycle flushing flow it's staving off the inevitable, but it's not preventing it. So instead of your spawning habitat cratering after 2 years of having a really high flushing flow, this is maybe dragging that decline out over a period of 12 or 15 years. So it's not going to be sufficient for really long-term maintenance of your spawning habitat. And then we got the big water years again. It'd been 20-some years since had flows like this, and all of a sudden we have flows in excess of 7,000 CFS, all the reservoirs filled up. And not surprisingly, we saw a repeat of the 1980s, where we went from baseline levels of about 1,000 trout per mile. And we had a little jump up in 2010, and that was because we actually did stock in 2009 to try and buffer some of the declines we were seeing. But then, all of a sudden now we're back up over 9,000 fish per mile. This is just astonishing increase in numbers of trout again. During this time, we were continuing to collect substrate information before and after these flushing flows. And what that kind of steered us towards is the fact that these flushing flow cycles have more benefit the cleaner the gravel is to begin with. And so if you kind of think about gravel in a stream that's just all the spaces around the gravel is full of sand and silt, you're trying to drag your hand across it, it's going to be kind of firm, almost like concrete. It's going to take a lot of effort to really move that stuff around. But if you have gravel that's not embedded with silt and sand, it's, the word fluffy kind of comes to mind, but it's much easier to move it around, and so you're going to get more cleaning of the gravel the cleaner it is to begin with. So armed with that knowledge, we went back to the Bureau and we requested a 10-day flushing flow in the spring rather than doing 5 in the spring and 5 in the fall. So this is no change from the Bureau's standpoint because it's all within the same water year as what we would normally do with the 5 in the spring and 5 in the fall. So we'd just be foregoing the fall in hopes that doing 10 in the spring would get more benefit. Now in 2013, they agreed to the 10-day flush, but unfortunately they were only able to deliver 7 days. That was due to some maintenance issues they had with Fremont Canyon Power Plant upstream. We did get a 10-day flush in 2014, and we've been collecting data since to try and evaluate this. Unfortunately, our evaluation from 2013 was kind of hampered by some other maintenance that they did on Gray Reef Reservoir itself, where they completely drained it in order to do some maintenance on the outlet gates. And that flushed just an incredible amount of really fine sediment into the river just immediately before the flushing flows. And we saw kind of a weird pattern there where it actually got worse after 5 cycles than what it was before, and that was due to all that fine sediment moving its way down through these study sites that we had set up. But then after that move through, we did see pretty good improvement between 5 and 7 cycles. So we did complete 10 cycles last year. We collected more data. I'm in the process right now of crunching all the numbers and working up the statistics. And we're set to meet with the Bureau of Reclamation in April to kind of discuss what we're finding with the 10 versus 5 and make some final recommendations for these future flows. But so far the data is looking pretty favorable that 10 is probably the direction that we'll lean towards going in the future. And what has this accomplished in terms of the fishery? Well, Gray Reef has arguably become one of the most popular river reaches in the state for fly fishing. We have 87 miles of blue ribbon water, meaning greater than 600 pounds of trout per mile in the stretch. And 61 of those 87 miles are solely due to natural reproduction. The lower 20-some miles below Casper, we do stock a fairly limited number of fish. And that's just to keep our population levels at our management objective. And in 2009, we did a creel survey, and we estimated 18,300 anglers with a catch rate of over a trout per hour. So the catch rates have tripled since before the flush and flow stuff began. And then the other thing is that 64% of our fishing pressure at that point in time was from non-residents. 15 or 20 years ago, you would have had essentially no non-residents fishing that river, and now the majority of the pressure, people that are from out of state, just to fish there. And so that brings up kind of an interesting, if you start looking at the economic impacts of this. Now, this management action in terms of doing these flushing flows essentially costs us nothing. There's a couple hours of administrative time to formally request these flows from the Bureau of Reclamation, but other than that, it's free of charge to us. Now, the Fish and Wildlife Service says the average expenditure of an angler in Wyoming is $74 per day. If you use our 2009 creel survey numbers, that equals about 1.3 million in direct expenditures into the local economy. However, not all anglers are average. So if you think about the guy who's on the guided fishing trip, he certainly spent more than $74 that day. And on the other end of the spectrum, I happen to know for a fact that kid didn't spend a dime that day. So that $74 falls out somewhere right in the middle. And what we know at Gray Reef is that the majority of our anglers are somewhere north of that $74 a day figure, where we've got 64% of these people are traveling in from out of state just to fish here. We also know that in 2009 anyway, 50% of the boats, of the drift boats on the river, were guided trips. Now this is 2009 data, and in hindsight, 2009 was probably not the best year to do a creel survey on the rivers. There's been an awful lot of changes since then, and I think probably now we're looking at more of a 90% of the boats are probably guided trips instead of 50%. And numbers we got from the BLM last year was that they had 22 outfitters permitted to guide on the river through BLM land. And of those 22 outfitters, there were 167 individual guides for mostly the 30 miles or so of river upstream of Casper. And Al Condor talked with Blake Jackson, who runs Crazy Rainbow Outfitters. It's one of the 3 biggest fishing outfitters in the Casper area. And according to him, he has 12 employees who make their living full time. That is their job off of guiding fishermen in the river. Plus, they employ a ton of part-time guides, especially during the summer. They had some data that estimated their average client spends $385 per day while they're fishing. That includes guide fees, tips, etc. And based on the number of trips that they run out of that shop alone, the economic impact to the community is about $770,000. So if you start taking into account that there's 3 outfitters that are that size of an operation, plus 19 smaller outfitters, and more than 60% of our fishing pressure is non-resident anglers, the best guess that we can come up with in terms of just direct expenditures into the Casper and Alcova area economy is about $5 to $7 million a year. That's mostly due to a management action that costs us nothing. So that's pretty amazing. And some other things that are going on around Casper that are essentially because the river is what it is today. The Casper Area Convention and Visitors Bureau uses the river as their poster child to promote travel and tourism to Natrona County. If you drive north out of Cheyenne on I-25, you'll pass a couple different billboards that are really trying to draw people to Casper for the river. Locally, there's enough interest in the river, and people are really kind of starting to take some pride and ownership in the river, and that is the city of Casper has just launched this $15.5 million river restoration project. Where they're going to do some work in the channel through the city of Casper to try and improve things even further. The Platte River Revival, which happens every year in September, is now the largest public lands day event in the nation. Just this last September, they had over 600 volunteers show up to remove trash from the river and cut down Russian olives, things like that. The Two Fly Foundation, the charitable fishing contest, is kind of modeled after the one-shot antelope hunt. They had a record-breaking year last year. They raised over $200,000 in their 1-2-day event. And since 2005, they've raised more than $1 million that they've donated into local charities. And of course, Gray Reef is regularly featured in national and international media. It really serves to draw even more people to it. So really, it's become clear over the last 20 years that these flushing flows, not only have they been an impressive tool in terms of the response that we get out of the fisheries, the fishery population, but they've really become the driving force behind a fairly significant economic engine. You know, one only has to stop off in tiny little alcove of Wyoming to see the effects of these. The general store any given morning is just bustling with waiter-clad folks lined up to buy burritos and coffee. And there's 3 different lodging options there. There's a ton of cabins that people rent. They're always full. The bar and grill is always packed at lunchtime, and you know, I don't think there'd be very much activity out in that country at all if it wasn't for this population that we have in the river. With that, I will take any questions.
Any questions for Matt?
President Plowda, Matt, are there any projects by the BLM to curtail some of the sediment flow actually into the river?
Mr. President, Commissioner Little, yes, there is a kind of a collaborative project going on. Keith Shop, our terrestrial habitat biologist in Casper, is working on a project the BLM is involved with at Bolton Creek, which is one of the main sediment contributors. And so there's some work that is starting really just in the last 5 years, looking at stabilizing some of these head cuts and trying to kind of even things out up country, so to speak, so that we can alleviate some of the problem in the river.
Thank you.
President Plowden, Matt, I guess I'm going to just look at an overview. What you're seeing here really is a conversion of a low-flow warm water stream into a power-generating cool water stream over this period of time. It's, you know, quite a conversion. There's trout never used to be here.
Yeah, Mr. President, Commissioner Price, yes, that's correct. You know, trout were never native to the North Platte drainage to begin with, and so before the construction of the dams, the stretch of river through Casper would have been pretty warm. The native fish community would have included things like sauger, sturgeon, potentially channel catfish, and really you'd probably had very little success having trout in the North Platte River near Casper. And so yes, the upstream dams created the cold water environment that's conducive to the trout survival.
Thank you.
Anything else for Matt?
Mr. President. Matt, the silt that we're flushing out of that stream, out of that stretch of the stream, is it causing accumulation problems downstream? Are we seeing additional silt in Glendo, or?
Mr. President, Commissioner Colbert, we haven't directly measured that. I mean, it's going obviously downstream, and it's not going to get through Glendo. I think if you were to look at the amount of sediment we're moving, by the time you get down to Glendo, there's so many other tributaries that come in upstream of there, you know, Deer Creek, Fox Elder Creek, etc. They're all contributing, you know, a lot of sediment and have been for years. And so I don't think what we're moving out of the upper 9 or 10 miles of river is really significantly adding to the amount of sediment going in the Glenville.
I suppose a lot of it ends up as bank deposition, doesn't it? It ends up on the banks.
Yes, matter of fact, it does. Yeah.
So it's rainbow and browns primarily?
And a handful of cuts.
Some cuts, huh?
Very interesting.
Anybody else for Matt? Good job, Matt.
Thank you.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, Director Talbot, our second fish presentation in a row will be by Bill Bradshaw, and Bill is a fisheries biologist in Sheridan, and Bill is going to tell us a nice success story, a collaborative story.
Morning, Bill.
Morning, President Plata, Commissioners, Director Talbot.
Yeah, don't forget him, huh?
Pardon?
Don't forget him.
No. When Chief Fowden asked me to present this morning, my first reaction was excellent. I really enjoy talking about this project. In my nearly 30-year career, I've not worked on a project that has such immediate positive benefits for so many game and non-game fish species. It's just truly, in my opinion, unmitigated, unqualified success story. And I really do enjoy talking about it. We'll always be indebted to the owners of the PG Ranch for allowing this project to go forward in the first place. I want to always remember that Travis Cundy, the Sheridan Region Aquatic Habitat Biologist, was the driving force from the department in terms of getting this project done, and I will always be thankful for the help from my fellow fisheries biologists, Gordon Edwards and Bobby Compton, who shared their expertise and experience when we tried to figure out if the bypass channel was in fact working. And not listed on the slide here are the landowners who, over the last several years, have given us access to Clear Creek, and I'm going to personally deliver our final report to those folks and thank them again for giving us access to Clear Creek and letting us do our work. If you would hover over the title, darn. It worked so well yesterday. Go to that map, please. It's the backup map. I apologize for that. I had a nicer map, but these two side-by-side maps depict the Powder River drainage and Clear Creek. The Powder River flows for about 450 miles from its source west of KC and the Southern Bighorns to its confluence with the Yellowstone in Montana. And it's considered by many people as the kind of the last best example of a undammed, free-flowing prairie stream in the country. Clear Creek is its major tributary, and it flows for about 112 miles. The headwaters are in the Cloud Peak Wilderness west of Buffalo, and it joins the Powder River a little bit downstream of Arvada. And the red line on the map on the right is the area that was made accessible to fish when the bypass channel was built around Kendrick Dam, and that's about 36 river miles. So fish can now go past Kendrick Dam at the lower end, and where the red line ends, just below Claremont, there's another irrigation diversion, the Pratt and Ferris number 3, that prevents any further upstream movement by fish at this point. So am I in control of the? Okay. The Powder River is probably best characterized as having highly variable flows and a shifting sand bottom. Anybody that's seen the Powder River in late summer is familiar with this view. And oftentimes I think people look at the Powder and kind of assume that there can't be many fish living in that system, and that's far from true. The Powder River has some 22 native fish species in it. They're well adapted to very extreme conditions, low flows, high temperatures, high salinity, and they'll go from living in conditions like this low flow picture to the one in the inset following a thunderstorm somewhere in the drainage in the summer to, we'll go from almost no flow to thousands of CFS, dramatically changing the conditions those fish are living in, and they're well adapted to that. Clear Creek, on the other hand, is a more typical stream, I guess. It's got a gravel and cobble dominated substrate. Doesn't wander around within the floodplain as much as the Powder River does. But many of the fish that are found in the Powder River are also found in Clear Creek. Not all, but there's some differences. But many of the fish are the same in both drainages. Just talk a little bit about some of the species. I guess this would be a charismatic megafauna. It's a shovel-nosed sturgeon. And those things actually they're not year-round residents in Wyoming. They migrate up from the lower Powder and the Yellowstone River itself. So they make a long trip into Wyoming. Until this last summer, we sort of thought that maybe they would migrate upstream as far as about I-90, maybe a little bit further, but we spent a fair amount of time looking last year, and we found these things almost in Sussex. So they're migrating almost the entire length of the Powder River from the Yellowstone. They lay their eggs, they spawn, and then the adults move out, and we've never seen a juvenile in the Powder River. These things, they'll live to be 60 or 80 years old. Pretty interesting fish. Sauger is another native game fish, as is the sturgeon. We've never seen these much upstream past Crazy Woman Creek, but we do find them in Lower Clear Creek. Historically, they were present in Clear Creek. Near Claremont, we have records from the 1800s that indicate that they were there at that time. Right now, this is mostly a spring migrant. Fish come up from the lower Powder into Clear Creek. But there are some resident fish in Clear Creek, too. We've got some sampling records from just below Kendrick Dam where we would find juvenile fish in the summer. It suggests that there were some year-round residents there. Channel catfish, another native game fish. This fish moves everywhere. Up and down the Powder River. You can find them in the Powder River clear up to KC year-round. When the river gets really low, they just hunker down and hold in a deep pool somewhere. We tagged one of these in Clear Creek a few years ago, and it went down Clear Creek, hit the Powder River, went all the way down the Powder River, went to the Yellowstone River, turned left, and went up the Yellowstone River to almost Billings when somebody caught it. So that fish had gone like 400 miles and just wandering around, I guess. These fish are common in Lower Clear Creek. Before we built the bypass channel, we hadn't seen them above Kendrick Dam. Several more of the sort of larger fish. That's a goldeye on the top. Those fish migrate up the Powder River in the spring, but we'll also find them as residents during the summer. The one in the lower left is a northern red horse. The adults move around a lot in the spring. They migrate. We'll find juvenile fish in the Powder and Lower Clear Creek year-round, as we do with the river carpsucker. And those fish are fairly large, something like that. But those are generally migrating species. The juveniles will inhabit Lower Clear Creek and the Powder. These are some of the smaller species that inhabit the Powder and Lower Clear Creek. The one on the upper left is a sturgeon chub, and it's a rare fish in Wyoming. It's an NSS1 species. From 2004 to 2006, we sampled the Powder River a lot, and we handled some 80,000 fish, and I think we saw 2 or 3 of those. And that's over sample stations from Pumpkin Buttes basically to the state line. So we saw a few of them. Happily, in more recent years, in the last 3 or 4 years, we've been sampling for those, and we've found them every year. So we've seen more of those fish in more places than we've ever had before in what I think were just very, very dry years. The one on the upper right is a western silvery minnow. I'll talk about it a little bit more later. It's an NSS2 species. It's in the Powder, uncommon. Never seen it in Clear Creek. President Clouder?
And then what's that acronym?
Oh, I'm sorry. I just made the assumption that native species status 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just a way to sort of designate which species have declined in distribution or abundance. And so species 1 and 2 are they're species we pay more attention to. We're concerned about their potential loss of habitat or reductions in numbers. Species 3 and 4 are more common and aren't as concerned. So, down on the lower left is a plains keelyfish. Only get about this big. Just a very interesting fish. Some years they're incredibly abundant in the Powder River. Some years you can't find one. They're not I guess it's debatable whether they're a native species or not, just part of the fish assemblage. And then a flathead chub in the lower right is a native species, and it's ubiquitous. It would be like an NSS 4 or 5. We find them everywhere, and they're in great shape. So those are some of the species. Again, there's about 22 in the Platte River and Lower Clear Creek. So here's a shot of Kendrick Dam. It was built by John B. Kendrick, our first territorial governor, in about 1910 or 1911. It's 112 feet across, and it's got about a 10-foot drop. So when it was built, it immediately became a complete fish migration barrier, and it's been in place for about 100 years. It delivers water. I'm not sure to how many acres. I'm thinking 1,200 acres. About 35 CFS is what they use on the PG Ranch, is what they irrigate. So that's what that delivers water to. And this is the lowest structure on Clear Creek. And I don't know if their water rights are territorial or not, but I think they usually get their water down here at the PG Ranch. So here's a shot of the bypass channel itself. And Travis negotiated with the owner of the PG Ranch for several years before we kind of worked out the details. And part of the agreement was that whatever we did, their water rights had to be satisfied. And, they didn't want to be encumbered with a lot of maintenance and those sorts of things. And Travis was able to work those details out. And this is what we came up with, is the bypass channel here. It's basically straight. You can see it where it cuts across that oxbow. Clear Creek flows from left to right in this slide. So fish enter the bypass channel by the dam there. You can see the turbulence. That's the dam. They enter the channel there and go upstream and then re-enter Clear Creek at the left side of the slide. And just some pictures of the head gates. It's essentially an irrigation diversion structure. With some sliding head gates to get water to go down the channel. Open and close them, and get some trash racks to keep the larger debris out of the channel itself. Then here are some pictures of the channel with water in it. We opened it on May 10th in 2010, and that's the upper left picture of the first little bit of water going down the channel. And you can see those rocks in the channel. Those are designed to create velocity shelters for fish. As the flows come up and the water's kind of, velocities increase, the fish can kind of tuck in behind those rocks and rest as they can kind of dart around those rocks and move up to the next one as they work their way up the channel. So you can see the low flow operations there in the top two pictures, and then bottom two pictures show the channel operating at about maximum capacity. When flows in Clear Creek get to about 2,400 CFS, it submerges the head gates, and so velocities through those head gates are high, and they in fact may become a barrier to some species. But that's about as much water as can go down the channel. It's about this deep when it's running at full capacity. And then you can see the kind of the pool it creates there as water backs up during high flows. But fish do find it. Well, when it was opened in 2010, we immediately wanted to know, is it working? So we used materials we had on hand that first year to try to catch fish. And this is a trap net normally used in lakes, and we modified it so we could tie it and anchor it in place. And it's facing downstream in the channel, so fish coming up the channel would be funneled into that trap, and it's kind of like a lobster trap. They get in, they can't get out. But it turns out that when flows in Clear Creek got to about 1,000 CFS, we just couldn't maintain it in position anymore. We just couldn't operate it. So that first year of sampling, we weren't able to sample as much as we liked. We sampled for 24-hour periods, and I think we got in 6 days that first year. We just couldn't sample it during high flows. We came back with a better mousetrap in 2011, and we were convinced that this was going to catch a lot of fish. It's anchored to the bottom of the concrete apron there. The idea is that fish would come up the channel and hit those pickets and then just be funneled into that trap. It's sort of like a crab trap again, get in and they can't get out. And it sort of worked. I mean, we could operate this in much higher flows. It didn't blow out and it stayed in place. But the problem was, again, at about 1,200 CFS in Clear Creek, our technicians started floating away. So we were, again, sort of limited. And again, I think we only got about 6 or 7 sampling periods in that second year. But in spite of the limited sampling effort, we learned quite a bit. And we actually learned quite a bit that first year. I estimated there'd be maybe 18 species that would be likely to use the bypass channel. And in that first year, we saw 16 of them in that sort of jury rig trap net. It was great news. We saw big catfish, goldeye, carp, little hybernathus species, whole range of sizes and body shapes. It just told us that fish really can negotiate this bypass channel. It's well designed, and it was designed to accommodate all the species, and it sure looks like it was doing that the first year. Actually, with our better mouse trap, we caught fewer species and fewer individuals than we did with the trap net, so go figure. One of the things I expected to see was catfish, like big catfish, making a spawning run. And I was really surprised to see that first year. I think the first night we pulled that trap net, I saw like 100 little catfish like this. Obviously, they weren't spawning. They're just moving. Gobs of those little things were going up that channel, up into Clear Creek above the dam. Saw lots of goldeye, a lot of flathead chub. But we didn't see any sauger or sturgeon, and those are certainly two of the species that we were very interested in. While we were trapping in 2010 and 2011, we were also electrofishing upstream of Kendrick Dam. A couple of folks up there by Leiter gave us permission to access the creek, and we sampled up there. We captured channel catfish, goldeye, river carp sucker, some 30 miles upstream of Kendrick Dam, and we had absolutely no records of those species in our files ever. So that tells me that those fish came up the bypass channel and moved that far upstream that first spring. And in that first year, I was talking to one of the landowners, Artie Thomas, and he was down there catching catfish with his grandson that first spring. And he said he'd never seen them there. And he was catching goldeye too, and he said he'd never seen those before either. But no sauger or sturgeon the first 2 years. In 2012, we wanted to try pit tag technology. We knew if we tagged enough fish and it went up the channel, if we had the antennas out, we could sample that bypass channel 24/7. We didn't have to worry about having to weight it or operate those traps. To ensure that we had some tagged fish in the system, we went down to the mouth of the Powder. It runs into the Yellowstone. We went out with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks folks, and we caught about 100 fish in one day. We tagged, I think, some 80 sturgeon and 30 sauger, and they staged there. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks folks know this. They stage there before they run up the Powder. Use those pit tags, their little glass tag. We put those in the body cavity. When a fish that has that tag swims through the antenna, it records the fish's passage. And we put a little external tag on those fish as well, so we could easily identify them. We also collected fish from the Powder between the state line and the mouth of Clear Creek, and down in Montana near Moorhead, we were able to catch some more sauger and sturgeon to tag. So we got as many tagged fish in the system as we could. This is just a shot of the antennas in the bypass channel. Hopefully you can see the one in the foreground there. The first year we actually had 3 to kind of figure out the dynamics of fish moving through the channel. Those things run 24/7, so if a tagged fish swims through those antennas, we should know it if the detectors are operating properly. That first year, we didn't detect any sauger or sturgeon, which of course was disappointing. We ran the detectors for 45 days, I think. We saw 3 catfish. 2 had been tagged in Clear Creek not too long before they actually went up the bypass channel, and 1 we had tagged in Moorhead, about 33 river miles away. That was interesting, but we already knew that catfish were using the bypass channel. In 2013, rather than trying to catch fish from a long stretch of the Powder, we concentrated just on Clear Creek. We only sampled for sauger and sturgeon in Clear Creek, about 5 or 6 miles between Kendrick Dam and where it hits the Powder, thinking that those fish are already in Clear Creek. They're probably the most likely to want to go up the bypass channel, if anything is. That was a strange water year, and that may have had something to do with our low catch, but we only caught 7 sauger and 1 sturgeon, and we tried pretty hard. But we put pit tags in those fish, and rather than just leave them to their own devices, it sort of forced the issue. We took those fish that we caught in Clear Creek and we transplanted them directly into the bypass channel. So, okay, well, you're either going to go up or down, and we put them in between our tag detectors and hope that they went up. I think we had 5 sauger released into the channel and 1 sturgeon. Well, things don't always work the way we think they would. Basically, most of those fish were never seen again. We don't know what happened to them. One of the sauger did go up, though, and that's good. I mean, that was the first sauger that we knew had gone up at least half of the channel. That's excellent news. We didn't know where those fish were. We waited and waited and waited, and they weren't showing up on the detector. So we blocked the bypass channel off with a net and turned the water off, drained the channel, and went and looked for them. Couldn't find them. But we did find a little sauger about this big that wasn't tagged. It had found the channel and gone about halfway up the channel by itself on its own volition. We tagged that one, turned the water back on, threw it back in the middle of the channel, and it immediately went upstream and back into Clear Creek above the dam. So now we had 2 sauger that we know had gone into Clear Creek above Kendrick Dam. Late in the season, just before we turned off the detectors for the year, we had another sauger that had gone, showed up on both of our tag detectors, the lower one and the upper one. It went through past both antennas up into Clear Creek, and that fish was one that we had tagged in 2012 in the Yellowstone River. And so that fish had migrated that far, came up the bypass channel, and gone up into Clear Creek. Never did see a sturgeon. In 4 years, we have not seen a sturgeon use a bypass channel. So, I guess with sturgeon, we just may never see them. And if you look at those fish, they kind of look like a stealth bomber. They're a bottom-oriented fish, and you can imagine if they lift their front end up and the water's going to hit them, it acts like a sail. They just may not be physiologically able to negotiate something like a bypass channel. Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks has a bypass channel very similar to the one at Kendrick, and they've not seen sturgeon use that one either. They've seen lots of sauger and other species, but not sturgeon. So that may be something that may just not happen. So we've seen everything but sturgeon. Just phenomenally good news, I think. Last summer we were shocking and a little different time than we had in the past, and we saw a lot of western silvery minnow above Kendrick Dam, something I've never seen in Clear Creek before. And I mean, a lot. It was more western silvery minnow than I ever have seen in the Powder River combined in all the years that I've sampled on the Powder River. It was really encouraging. I don't know where they came from, but they came up the bypass channel en masse and were in Clear Creek. And we found some of those, again, almost upstream as far as lighter. Continue to see channel catfish, goldeye, river carp sucker throughout that 36 river miles above Kendrick Dam. I think we will continue looking for sauger. I'm pretty optimistic that over time we'll see a resident population established in Clear Creek. I think historically they were there as residents. There's some evidence for that, and I think that will happen again. It just may take some time. Shovelnose sturgeon may never have used Clear Creek much. They may have come up into lower Clear Creek, and we just don't know. We might try some different kind of netting. Somebody suggested we might try this environmental DNA testing just to see if they've been there. I'm not sure how effective that is, and I don't know much about that technique, but we'll keep looking over time, and hopefully we'll see some changes in the fish population dynamics. So if there are any questions, I'd sure be happy to try to answer them.
Questions for Bill? Mr. Price.
I have 2 questions, Bill. What was the cost of this project?
Commissioner Price, I understand it was about $400,000 for the design and construction of the channel.
And the other thing is, can you fish in the bypass channel?
Pardon?
Is it allowable to fish in the bypass channel?
About a quarter of a year.
I'd go upstream of it.
Okay. Bill, I just a thought. I guess a fish that comes up the Powder River has to make a left to go down Clear Creek to get to the dam, right? If I'm looking at that right.
To get to the dam?
Yeah.
President Cloud, the fish come up the Powder, they turn right to get into Clear Creek, so then they just go up Clear Creek to hit the dam.
So Clear Creek runs from south to north or north to south?
Kind of west, yeah, because the powder's running north. So yeah, the Clear Creek goes kind of from west and then kind of southwest and then hits the powder and then,
Oh, okay.
or northwest, excuse me.
Well,
It's north.
right.
Yeah, the powder runs north.
Northeast.
Powder runs
Yeah.
north and Clear Creek runs south.
It's
Yeah, it comes from Buffalo,
Okay.
kind of goes east and then sort of veers north before it hits the powder.
Well, I'm looking at your map here.
Yeah.
At the Powder River running north, where it joins Clear Creek. It's got to go south to get to Kendrick Dam. If you were a fish,
Oh, if you're a fish.
Yeah, if you fish, the water runs north.
I understand that. And my question was, the fish got to make a left turn.
That's right. It does.
They make a right
That's
turn,
right.
make a right turn.
Okay.
From Montana, it's got to take a right.
The rivers, excuse me, flow the same direction, right? Okay.
Yes.
One other question, and this may seem a little juvenile, but a fish comes to Kendrick Dam. They cannot get around Kendrick Dam. Does a fish naturally know to turn around and go back to that bypass channel? I mean, I understand a deer using an underpass and antelope using the overpass and all those things that you train them to do, but
President Cloud, I probably can't answer that question with any authority, but, fish will hit the dam. They may find what they need below the dam to spawn. So they may spawn below the dam. That'd be my guess. If they find what they need, they'll spawn. Yeah, or if they find the channel, they may continue up.
sure. Anything else for Bill?
Mr. President, Bill, this shovel-nosed sturgeon. You said it lives up to 60 years. How big will those things get?
Fisher Culver, yeah, it's 60, 70, 80 years. They're long-lived fish, real primitive, boneless. A big female might be like that. Males tend to be a little smaller.
We don't have those anywhere else in Wyoming, do we?
We do. They're native to the Bighorn drainage.
Oh.
They disappeared after Yellowtail Dam was built, but departments reintroduced them above Yellowtail. And Mark Smith is here, and he would know more about their kind of long-term fate. I don't know if juvenile fish have been found. I know adults have been found.
It was back in the beginning in the mid-90s, we had done fantastically well and had new state records out of the Bighorn. We just don't know if they're reproducing very well.
Do they catch those by snagging, or can you catch one in the mouth? Can you hook one?
A lot of anglers fishing for catfish using night crawlers and catching.
I see. Fisher Culver. Chicken livers.
Chicken liver.
Chicken livers.
Poor chicken, huh?
Interesting.
Bill, thank you. Between you and Matt, you should know that your enthusiasm and your work is very refreshing, and I guess that's why we have a state with some great fishing in it, thanks to you guys. So it's duly noted.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
President Cloud, if you will, and Commissioners, Director Talbot. What may not be obvious to everybody in the audience is this Kendrick project and the other fish passage projects that we're developing around the state of Wyoming are really restoring the natural migration routes for these fish. It leads to population resiliency and therefore ensures the survival of these fish over the long term. Think of Trapper's Point or perhaps the mule deer bottleneck near Fremont Lake, where we're trying to preserve those. Here we're trying to restore them. So while the price tag was big, $400,000 for 36 miles of river, the price tag for losing this fish forever is even greater, and that's why we're involved in this. And this we have many partners, and without them, we could not restore these migration pathways. Appreciate this time.
Thanks, Mark.
Mark,
Oh.
where do we stand on that sturgeon chub listing? Have we seen a petition again for that one? I can't remember.
It's always hovering in the background.
It was petitioned and then -90, right?
That's correct.
And has it been repetitioned, do you know?
Not that I'm aware of. No, it has not been. What we're finding is when everybody was looking for them, it was 2000 or later, and that was in fact our dry years. These fish move in response to high water years, and the crews have during those high water years found numerous numbers of these fish moving up and holding them.
We have seen several more. We
Oh,
do
yes.
have quite a few of those.
Yeah, the Sheridan crew in particular has been adept at finding these during the high water years. Correct. Okay. We're convinced.
President Cloud,
Commissioner Price.
I remember that when we responded to the.
Well, hang on, Charles. Go ahead.
Thank you.
All right, Charles.
Mark, he said, Bill said 400,000 restored. How much of that was commission money and how much was outside money? Leverage. I'm just curious, as these things you're planning around the state, we put some commission money in and then leverage it to get it done from other sources?
President Cloud and Commissioner Price, I'll have to get those figures to you. Typically, the commission dollars would be 1/3 or less the total price.
Okay,
I will bring it.
I'm just interested because, you know, you're talking about doing this around the state at other places, and we're not going to be able to do it all on our own, but if we get help, that's going to be a good deal.
That's correct. One of our biggest partners is the Wyoming Wildlife Natural Resource Trust. Typically, they're bringing in 1/3 to 1/2 of the budget amount. Fish and Wildlife Service, when we have species of concern, such as these NSF 1 and 2s, is a notable contributor. In Trout Unlimited, where we have trout species where we're trying to create passageway, is a huge partner, bringing in 1/3, 1/2 of the dollars. So there is a large collaboration of organizations and agencies. So $400,000 is not the commission.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else for Mark? Thanks, Mark.
Mr. President, Director Talbot, members of the commission, the commission has expressed interest in the past in occasionally being able to be presented informational presentations on some of the department's law enforcement efforts and some of our more interesting cases. And so today we have an opportunity to have a presentation by Wheatland Game Warden David Ellsworth, who recently closed a pretty significant case. It actually was, he started this case when he was here stationed in Cheyenne. He's only been in Wheatland now. We just signed him there actually the first part of this month, so he's only been there a few weeks. And he did actually agree to go there, even though we told him that that Commissioner Clark would be in his new warden district. He still agreed to go. And anyway, David's got a pretty interesting case here this morning for I think about the next 20 or 30 minutes.
Welcome, David.
Thank you. President Crowder, members of the commission, Director Talbot. Yeah, so just to kind of preface this a little bit, I was still a probationary employee when I took this case on. So needless to say, I had a bit to learn before I could actually do anything with it. I guess when I got hired, they asked me how I best learned things, and they told them I learned best by doing. And I said, okay, well, go solve this. So that's how I got it. Needless to say, this case started about a year ago. Actually, the initial report was over a year ago. It started with a stop poaching report, and basically what it said was this gentleman, Ken Bales, shot an antelope, and that's all we had. After talking with the RP reporting party, She mentioned that there was evidence on social media that indicated this was accurate, and so that's where I started. I got online, and that was the first thing I saw. That's Ken Bales posing with buck antelope, and come to find out it's right there at his house. So the next thing I did was started looking at licenses, and this is a complete license history for this individual. There's no antelope licenses on file. So that immediately kind of sent up a red flag, and I started doing a little bit more digging. Since that one was front and center out in the open, I thought I'd see what else I could find. And these are a little bit hard to see. There we go. Got a pointer?
There's a little green.
So these, I just highlighted some comments. He mentioned that it was good eating, one shot, one kill, just over 110 yards. So relatively convincing that he was the one that took it. Doing a little bit more digging through his history, I was able to find, this is a picture of a swift fox, and he mentions that it was live trapped. It's one of at least 9 that he has trapped. Claimed that he releases some of them maybe not. Needless to say, live trapping or otherwise take of swift fox is not legal. And a few more photographs. This one was of particular interest. Again, says that he took one out of the herd. There was 200 in the herd. Oh wait, now there's 199. And then this comment says that he died of an SKS heart attack, or heart attach if your spell check's not turned on. So that gave me an idea of what he used to harvest these critters with. And just on the offshoot, when I was at the academy, I learned if you've got one suspect, look for 2. If you've got 1 violation, look for 2. So I started kind of looking around, since he was obviously pretty vocal about commenting about his actions. I found this on a friend of his, and at least as of 2012, claims that he had a 4-point buck and a doe mule deer as well, which he didn't have any licenses for. Started to see a pattern here. Digging a little bit further, this one was just kind of total happenstance. I came across Mr. Clark. Mr. Clark made a comment to Mr. Bales. Not even anything obvious, but just noting that where are all the big ones at? Oh, they're behind my house. So he obviously keeps track of the herds around his property as well. Go ahead.
Where's this at?
So this photograph was taken right around Wheatland 2, Wheatland Reservoir number 2, so up along the Palmer Canyon Road up towards Laramie Peak. Any rate, I came across John Clark, and just out of my curiosity, since he said dinner was out back, I'm guessing he ate deer. So I went to his page. That's the first thing I saw. He's got a nice mule deer buck. So I kind of did the same process all over again. Started looking at licenses. I found this photograph as well, indicating it was the first antelope with a bow in 2012. And then a few more comments. So about to get the Dutch oven out for deer chili, confirming yes, that was his deer. He kept it. And a few more. On his way to cut and quarter, pack and freeze his elk, and then deer was all cut and frozen. Now time to get to the elk, and he was after another one. So anyway, my guess was he had numerous critters, and this one just kind of sealed the deal. Just showed that intent that he was planning to harvest at least 3 more antelope, 1 more elk that year, possibly some ducks and geese, and then maybe some small game. So with that, I pulled up all of his license history. Again, no antelope licenses on file, and no deer licenses since 2009. So I wasn't totally certain that those comments were totally up to date, but at least from what I was seeing, he was making enough comments that sounded like it was corresponding at least to some of the licenses that he had. 2012, he did have 2 cow elk licenses. He mentioned he had the one, he was after another, which would suggest he was at least in the right there. But for the deer and antelope, there was nothing. He also had the archery license, which is what he used to take the antelope. So next step, I had to learn how to write a search warrant. And coincidentally, we were doing some elk classification flights in January, and just happened to be flying over Wheatland Reservoir number 2 and 3, and so I just snapped that out the window on our way by. That's the Clark residence. This actually came in pretty handy because I knew that there was a lot of vehicles, and I wanted to be able to include everything in the curtilage of the home, if you had sheds and outbuildings and that kind of thing. So I was at least able to get a total count of vehicles. And then if you notice that red Jeep and that red Jeep look awfully familiar, this picture is at Clark's house. I didn't notice that.
Who's on the left? Whose house is that?
This is Vale's house. This is Clark's house.
Oh, okay.
And Clark's is it's not the camper, but the house behind it. But his property included the camper and the bus and the van and all the other vehicles.
They live close together? Or?
They don't. So Vale's lived about 20, 30 miles up Palmer Canyon Road, and Clark lived off of Highway 13 in Rock River. So I'm not too far away, but about 40, 50 miles away. After I learned how to write a search warrant, I gathered basically all of the wardens from the Laramie region, 12 in total, and we served warrants simultaneously on each one of the houses on March 28th. And for Vale's, nobody was there. He pretty well cleared out of his house. It looked like fairly haphazardly. There was a little bit of an officer safety risk on this. He had a prior firearms restriction from previous legal issues. And so we had a Albany County Sheriff deputy with us, and had he been there, we were expecting to find firearms, and therefore he would have just gone straight into custody. But he wasn't there. There was coincidentally ammunition all over the house, on the tables, on the floor, in the sofa. I mean, literally all over the house. And so items that we were able to find, despite him having vacated the facility, was an antelope carcass, legs and hide that were in the crawl space, digital camera, memory cards, multiple media storage devices, unidentified bird feathers, deer antlers that were cut from the skull, relatively fresh. Still remain 35 packets of meat from a freezer, 4 swift fox hides, hence he didn't release all of them, and raptor claws that looked, not confirmed, but they looked a lot like eagle claws. And then we also found the SKS rifle, but it was not at Vale's house. It was at Clark's house. Just to kind of keep all the evidence together, I listed it there. But when we got to Clark's house, he was home, and his wife was home, his son was home, and Vale's former girlfriend was there. She'd moved in, stated that Vale's had left the state, moved back to Tennessee, and she was there in the interim. So we were able to find his rifle at Clark's house, and because he was there, we found significantly more information and evidence. And this kind of brings me to the part of the title of this presentation. It was a lifestyle poaching. The Clark family, and I suspect the Vales family, were all what they called doomsday preppers. So they had multiple freezers, multiple pantries, cupboards full to the gills, lots of firearms, and so anyway, it took most of that day to kind of work through everything. But we ended up finding, you see John Clark's cell phone. We found a trail camera, digital camera, lots of memory cards. We ended up with 71 packets of frozen meat, some labeled, some not. We found flats of jars of canned meat. I mean, just tons of pre-cooked, prepped meat, and buckets of dehydrated meat, and I mean 5-gallon buckets of dehydrated meat. During the search warrant, both Clark and the former ex-girlfriend of Vales were voluntarily interviewed. During that interview, Clark eventually admitted to taking most of his animals with a .30-06 and a .270 rifle. So we seized both of those. We found the compound bow in the bus outside of the house that was in the photograph with the antelope. And then the very first picture with all of the mule deer antlers, those were all hanging up in his front pantry. And eventually he walked us out there and said that he had taken 1 deer per year from 2009 to 2013. So that was 5, and then we had 2 sets that he claimed belonged to his son. So we also found a bag of rainbow trout. Come to find out, some of those were actually donated from our fish crews when they were doing surveys out on Wheatland 3. And then he had a fresh swift fox hide that was sitting on a stretcher in the pantryway. And then in the bus, we also found 2 golden eagle legs and talons, and 2 what we suspected were great horned owl legs and talons. So took all of that stuff, went back to the office, and I called the gals at the Game and Fish Forensic Laboratory in Laramie. They came over on April 9th, and they sampled everything. They were there all day. It took a couple months for them to come back with all of the results, but it came back with 18 different animals that were seized from the Clark's residence, 11 tested and confirmed, 7 not tested or inconclusive. Basically what that means is they tested 11 and they were able to identify 11 specific genotypes, identifying that they were specific or individual animals. And then 7 of them, like the fox and the raptors and that kind of thing, they were either not tested or they came back inconclusive. Some of the canned meat and already processed and dried meat wasn't testable. So, and then out of Vales, despite, like I said, everything being moved out, we still found 12 different animals there. 7 that were tested and confirmed, 5 that were tested or inconclusive. Just so I could kind of wrap my head around what I had, I put this spreadsheet together. Basically, what it is, the letters that are associated were the specific genotypes that the laboratory associated with each animal, and then I just gave each one a number so I could get a total tally. So out of Clark, we had 2 pronghorn bucks, 2, maybe 3 bull elk, all of the mule deer that were hanging up in the entryway, 1 mule deer doe, 1 mule deer buck, the 1 fox off the stretcher, and then the raptors, and then the bag of trout. Subsequently at Vales, we had the pronghorn buck, I suspect was the same one in the photograph. We had 3 does, 2 mule deer bucks, 1 mule deer bow, 1 mule deer doe, 4 fox, and the 1 set of raptors. So once I had all this, I had to figure out what to do with it. I still hadn't talked with Dales. Eventually, I was able to talk to him, and it was just a phone interview. He was still in Tennessee, but he stuck to his story of he had never harvested a single big game animal in the state. He claimed that most of that meat was given to him, but he could or would not provide the source of those donations. So, at any rate, what I ended up with was, since Clark had admitted to taking all of these, he was issued citations under statute 23.3.102D, which is our trophy game statute, 4 counts for mule deer without a license, 2 counts for buck antelope without a license, and then for illegal possessions, 2 counts on the bull elk meat, the buck mule deer meat, and then I wrote him quite a bit of warnings. He ended up being surprisingly very cooperative throughout this whole thing. After he kind of realized the evidence that we had against him, he didn't fight us. He, like I said, he walked us through every rack that he had for every year. So I took that into consideration as well, and I even gave him the benefit of the doubt on one illegal take of a buck antelope with a black powder firearm. That was the very first one that I could track that was taken without a license. Those citations alone are a minimum $5,000. So we worked with him quite a bit on this. And then because the trout was given, some of it was given by our department personnel, he was still in an over limit. But he was actually, I let that one lie. And with trapping without a license, he was helping a friend that was having medical issues, so again, I let that one lie. And then with Dales, like I said, there was no cooperation. There was minimal conversation provided. He didn't really want to talk to us, so I let him talk to a judge on that one. So he was issued citations, and the one benefit of the doubt I gave him on this one, it was a buck antelope, so I could have given him the trophy game statute, which is a must appear violation, being that he was already in Tennessee. By making it 102A instead of 102D, I was able to make that bondable. It decreased the fine by quite a bit, but if he was in Tennessee, he wanted to stay in Tennessee, I was totally fine with that. So, at any rate, mostly illegal possessions. Like I said, I did have the one take without a license. The raptor parts, even the story on that, they were found in a wooden box. In his house, he claimed that he found them in that box alongside the road. A hard time with that. And then he did eventually admit that he hadn't been just trapping those fox, but that he also shot them out of his yard. So being that he wasn't trapping them, he was shooting them. That's not an incidental take, so he was issued citations on those as well. For the court results, John Clark pled guilty to everything. He did not seek counsel, and he just wanted to get it over and done with. So the prosecution, again, dismissed 4 counts of the illegal possession charges, and he was still sentenced to just over $30,000 in fines, and all of his hunting, trapping, fishing privileges were suspended for 36 years. Again, these fines are minimal. This is could have been double that with just fines, and I did not ask for restitution. And then with Vales, again, since he was in Tennessee, I got in contact with wildlife officers in Tennessee to serve him in person so I could confirm receipt of these. They were happy to oblige, and they met with Vales, issued him the citations. He sought counsel, and a guilty plea, intent to file a guilty plea was sent to the court, and it was expected January 5th. As of this week, guilty plea had still not been submitted and was extended to, I think, February of this year. So at any rate, I don't expect any complications with it. A guilty plea is still pending, but as far as specific penalties go, that's yet to be determined. So in a nutshell, that was a good bit of my last year. With that, I'll take any questions.
Questions for David?
Mr. President? So, when you were initially starting the case and you were on Facebook, were they posting that on a page that the whole public could see, or had they friended you?
President Cloud, Commissioner Little, yes, those were all public views. I didn't friend anybody. I neglected to mention with the house search warrants, I did file with the district judge in Albany County for a Facebook warrant. And when they say Facebook saves everything, they mean everything. For Vales, I received 114,000 pages of his activity. For Clark, I received about 4,600 pages.
And so that's when you actually got the pictures?
No, those pictures were open to the public, so I had those before.
So they had their security for their profile page was limited or non-existent.
It was in place, but not for those. So, yeah, after the warrants were filed, I received more, but those were the significant ones. So.
Mr. President, describe your experience with say the judge in securing the search warrant and the prosecution in advancing the case.
President Cloud, Commissioner Healy, they were great. So the house warrants were secured with Judge Castor, the circuit judge, being that Facebook is out of state, their data is stored out of state. I went to District Judge Donnell for that search warrant, and yeah, I mean, it was, knock on wood, it was a piece of cake. Like I said, it was my first search warrant, so I had everybody that was willing to read it.
Done right then.
Yeah, I suppose, but it was a pretty easy process. It did take quite a bit of time to get all that data back from Facebook, but no, once everything was filed, it was pretty quick.
President Tolley, did you have legal advice on wending your way through the channels to get the search warrants and stuff? I mean, did you do this on your own, or did you have legal advice saying you should need to go this, and this?
President Cloud, Commissioner Price, I did. I worked with the investigative unit out of Laramie. I worked with the attorney, the district attorneys out of Albany County, and I walked in there and I said, I'm as green as grass. Teach me. And they told me what needed to happen. I had, somewhat of a platform that I needed to run through and make sure I had all the legal terms and everything in there. So I had a lot of help.
But, President, I guess, yeah, I appreciate the detail and that you must have gone through to get this all done. And evidently you did it all right.
Well, like I said, I had a lot of help. The forensics laboratory was absolutely critical in this. They they told me what we had. As far as I knew, I had some deer racks and a whole bunch of meat that I had no idea what it belonged to. So they were really able to kind of map out what happened, and barring not being able to tell me how old the meat was, you know, they did a lot. So.
Okay, very good, and thank you.
Different product. So they could tell that meat if it's a elk, or they can tell the year it was killed and what species it is?
President Cloud, Commissioner Anselmi, they could not tell me how old it was, but they were able to tell me species, gender, and that it was genetically different than a piece of meat sitting next to it. So they were able to map a genotype on it and tell me that this piece belonged to a bull elk, this piece belonged to a doe deer.
Because Aaron was missing a couple cows. I was wondering if there's any beef in that.
We did end up with some domestic animals too out of that whole bit, but nothing with brands. So.
All right, anything else for David? Fine job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Very nice.
We'll be back here about 10 after, and then we'll get with Nick and Gillian and learn all about the bird world. spotlight's on you.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Cloud and members of the commission. I'd like to introduce our next speakers. Nick Van Lannen and Gillian B. are both with Rocky Mountain Bird Observatory. They're stationed out of Fort Collins, but they work everywhere from northern Mexico all the way to North Dakota. So they have quite a range. We try to keep them busy in Wyoming. The Rocky Mountain Bird Observatory was founded in 1988, and for what we're doing with our State Wildlife Action Plan, the 56 birds that are listed in there as species of greatest conservation need, they're critical to our efforts to monitor those species and try to keep them from getting on the endangered species list. So without any further ado from me, I'll have Nick and Gillian come up and address the commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And if I may, I'd approach. I have a annual report and a little calendar here for you. And that's got our business cards in there too, so if you have any need to contact us in the future, please feel free to do so. So we really do appreciate the opportunity to come here today and tell you a little bit about our organization and some of the work that we're doing here in Wyoming. So thank you very much for that. So a little bit about the Rocky Mountain Bird Observatory, founded back in 1988. We're a nonprofit organization, 501c3. We started out as the Colorado Bird Observatory, and then I guess grew a little big for our britches and started finding ourselves working outside of Colorado a good bit. So we kind of broadened that to Rocky Mountain. This year marks 25 years now of bird conservation for our organization. Headquartered in Brighton, Colorado. We do have an office actually with more permanent staff in Fort Collins, so not too awful far away. Once described as the little bird observatory that could, we're now up to 48 full-time permanent staff members. We are run by a board of directors, so we have 12 folks on the board there. We hire up to about 50 seasonal technicians each year to help with the data collection. That's both domestic and also down in Mexico. And then greatly aided by about 200 volunteers as well each year. Doing citizen science projects, helping with education programs and things like that. And of course, the things that RMBO is involved in wouldn't be possible without a huge number of partners, about 200 partners between federal and state agencies, NGOs, private landowners, industries, universities. Our full-time staff try to keep ourselves busy with participating in joint ventures, landscape conservation cooperatives. We sit on the Partners in Flight steering committee. Also, we run manage the database for the Partners in Flight group, and then also sit on the North American Bird Conservation Initiative steering committee as well. And the picture there in the lower right, that's Bar Lake State Park, where we're headquartered. So our new motto, it's changed a little bit. We used to go with the motto of conserving birds in their habitats, but really we've kind of changed our tactic a little bit, in that we know that people are just so critical to conserving wildlife. And so the new motto is connecting people, birds, and land. And again, it's just addressing that idea that we know that all citizens are contributing to solutions for conservation, stewardship, and sustainability. And so Bob mentioned this, but our geographic scope, we're partnering with folks all the way in the north tip of Idaho over to North Dakota, and then all the way down into central Mexico. So that's encompassing portions of 13 states in the U.S., 8 states in Mexico. We work across 8 different bird conservation regions. So those are the areas that are shown in color on that map as the kind of ecoregions with similar habitat and thought to have similar species of birds. And then also in 4 different forest service regions as well. I think one of the things that really makes RMBO unique is that we have this integrated approach. So we try to tackle conservation through a combination of education, science, and stewardship, and so that all 3 teams within RMBO are kind of feeding into each other. The science team is looking for best management practices. We can help inform our stewardship team that's working on private lands, and then also inform education, who they're working with school groups and also general members of the public to try to kind of break down that barrier between people and nature. It seems to be more and more an issue with our youth today. And so, yeah, all of them feeding together, it's been cool. We've had some folks that have gone through a bird camp through our education program actually come and collect data for us about 15 years later. So again, kind of cementing that full circle approach. Talking a little bit about the science team where I'm housed within, the main goal that, for us there is to inform conservation decision makers. It's fun to look at the birds, but really we want to try to influence management in the future. And so we do that through developing innovative bird monitoring programs, and that can be everything from multi-species monitoring efforts to single species. So looking here, like this is a black swift, they nest behind waterfalls. So a multi-species monitoring effort doesn't really work so well for them. You have to go in kind of at dusk right to these waterfalls and look for them. And then really what we're interested in is researching factors that are affecting birds and their habitats. And you can see through, here's again a mountain plover, a species of greatest conservation need in Wyoming. You know, they have unique habitat needs as well. One of the biggest things that we occupy ourselves with within the science team at RMBO is this Integrated Monitoring and Bird Conservation Regions program. That's a mouthful, so I'll call it IMBCR. But it actually represents the second largest breeding bird monitoring effort in the nation, behind the breeding bird survey routes, which I'm sure you've all heard of. So that's actually spanning portions of 13 states. We have complete coverage of Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado. And it's a program that's been designed to meet partner needs at multiple spatial scales. So everything from a BLM field office to a national forest to statewide estimates as well. And one of the things that's really unique about that monitoring effort is that it provides seamless monitoring across both private and public lands. So, you know, so many times researchers are just working on public and they say, well, it's impossible to access private lands. We've really kind of refuted that idea, and so we're partnering with a whole lot of private landowners to, if you're restricting your surveys and your research to just public lands, then it's hard to get statewide estimates. So currently this multi-species conservation or monitoring program is providing population information for 161 different species in Wyoming, and 21 of those species are species of greatest conservation need. Give you a sense of the survey area. I mentioned it's the second largest program in the nation. You can see in the hatched area on this map, that's where we're all surveying, and like I mentioned, we have complete coverage throughout the state of Wyoming. Really kind of an interesting, has to be a very integrated design in order to be able to conduct surveys for birds of all species, from deserts and grasslands all the way up to snowfields in the above tree line. And then I mentioned that we are surveying private lands, a huge focus of ours, again, connecting people, lands, and birds. So obviously, so we're not trespassing on property, we need to take a lot of precautions. We randomly select the locations where we would like to do a survey. We determine who owns that parcel. We contact them first with a permission letter, with a stamped and addressed envelope that they can just return, giving us permission. If we don't get that back, then we do try to follow up with phone calls. And then when we receive permission, we have whoever's going to do the survey give them a call 2 days or so before they're going to be out on the property. A lot of times we're lining up permission in February and March, and if they see somebody wandering around their property with binoculars in June, they don't always know what's going on. So it's nice to give them that heads up just a day or two before the survey. And then I think what's also really critical to kind of fostering relationships with the private landowners is to follow up with them. So following the survey, once we've entered all the data and had it proofed, then we like to send them a bird list of what we saw on their property. We usually send them a small token of our appreciation. This year, the gift is those calendars that you just got. So just a little something. And in total, the private landowner effort, we conducted surveys on 516 different properties. And 86 of those were in Wyoming with a success rate, and that's for folks that we were actually able to get a hold of and talk to on the phone. 86 of them actually said, yeah, come on out, which, you know, Wyoming maybe has a reputation for being a little bit difficult to work with and gain access for some of the private landowners, but that hasn't been our experience. It's been really great. So counting birds is all fun and well and good, but really the idea is that we want, again, to inform management And so the conservation applications is a huge focus of ours. We want to help land managers be able to manage habitat at local scales, but also help land use planning at larger scales. So we have our technicians collect a little bit of data where they actually count the bird species, and that can help inform this habitat modeling efforts that we do here. So that's looking at the likelihood that a parcel of land would be occupied by a particular species, and how the amount of sagebrush cover, for this example, influences that likelihood. So we can give that to land managers, and they can understand how habitat enhancement projects may affect these birds. And then also, as I mentioned, at the larger scale, we can produce maps like this in the lower right corner. This is actually a species richness map for 3 species of sagebrush obligate songbirds, so birds that rely on sagebrush. And you can see in the green areas where all 3 of those species are likely to occur at the same time. And then it's been mapped with the hatching area that you can probably best see here. That's actually the greater sage grouse 100% occupied range. So it's actually sort of looking at 4 species at once. I think it's interesting to note just how critical this southwest region of Wyoming is for these sagebrush obligate birds. And then the next step is also to develop decision support systems for bird conservation. So you start thinking about multiple species. They all have different and unique needs. You're balancing the needs of private landowners, ranchers, budgets for land managers, and it can turn into a very complicated situation. So we've been developing a decision supports tool for sagebrush communities that can kind of optimize choices, balancing expenses for habitat enhancement projects, the densities and occupancies of these 3 songbirds that are currently declining throughout their range, as well as sage grouse.
What are those 3?
Oh, yeah. So this is a brewer sparrow, sagebrush sparrow, and sage thrasher. Thank you.
You didn't know that?
I did. I just want to see if he did.
The joke that I tell my technicians is the defining characteristic of this little guy here is that there is no defining characteristic.
Yeah. If it's nothing else, it's that.
Yeah, process of elimination. And then, of course, you know, it's great to produce the tools, but if we're not getting it into the hands of the people that are making the decisions, then we're not really doing what we want to be doing. So data dissemination and tool production are critical parts of what the science team is working on. So with the help of our partners, we've created a Rocky Mountain Avian Data Center. I'm just going across the tabs here. You can see there's summaries of the projects. There's information for people that are interested in doing data collection, so that includes data sheets and proposals. I know that some of the energy teams that are working in the state have used that for some of their pre-development monitoring. We also have links to other databases, the tab for exploring the data. That's how members of the public, land managers, can query out results and also data that we collect. We also have information on our citizen science projects and links to all of our reports and publications there. And there is a mapping feature within the Explore the Data tab. However, it is really important to know that we do respect the anonymity of the private landowners that work with us. And so we do, it's sort of a course level mapping. You can't zoom in to the point where you could tell whose property a greater sage grouse was seen on. We don't want rabid birders using this tool and trespassing on private lands.
So in that data, Bob, how is that incorporated into like what wind has and wasps? Is this a separate data set or is it all integrated? I mean, we're getting so many of these things out there right now. I guess that's the question. If you're looking at trying to find data about black-backed woodpeckers or whatever it may be, some sufficient species, is your data incorporated into what we already have access to?
That's a great question. Thank you. Yeah, actually, so we partner with the Wyoming Natural Diversity Database. They actually do a small portion of the data collection within Wyoming in Thunder Basin National Grassland, Medicine Bow National Forest, and Bighorn National Forest. And so we partner with them, and at the end of the year, after we've input all of the data into our database and proofed it, we then export all of the Wyoming data to them, and they house all of this information in the WIN database. In terms of the WAS database, I'm not familiar with that.
As long as we've got it somewhere, it's in WIN stuff.
You do. Yep. And I guess I also want to say that, you know, learning to use a new tool and to run queries can be a bit intimidating, and so we've really tried to bridge that gap by offering workshops. I provided a workshop 2 years ago at the Wyoming TWS meeting. We've also visited just one-on-one with BLM biologists, state game and fish biologists, to make sure that people can use this tool and know how to query out the information that's available. There's also a pretty snazzy video link to a demonstration as well. And then with that, I just wanted to thank all of our funding partners. We have a diverse partnership. Forest Service, BLM, state agencies, Wyoming Game and Fish has contributed to this effort through state wildlife grants for a number of years. We've been partnering with y'all since 2002, I believe. But a lot of other different states as well as LCCs, National Park Service, Department of Defense, you name it. So I want to thank them. And with that, I'll hand it over to Gillian, who's a brand new stewardship director. She's been with us for about 3 weeks now, and she's going to tell you a little bit about what they do and the work that they've done on private lands throughout Wyoming. So thank you very much.
Director Talbot, President Pluta, Commissioners, thank you for having us here. I'm pretty excited to be here with you. The past 3 years I was in western South Dakota, so you all are just hopping a skip away, and I really love the flora and fauna and culture of Wyoming, so I'm really glad to be here. And you folks are my first audience in my new position, so we'll see how it goes. But basically, I just wanted to give you guys a brief overview about the stewardship program. Some of you might be aware of it, some of you may not. In the past, you folks have supported us. So I really look forward to future conversations to kind of see how we too can collaborate to kind of complement each other's mission when it comes to putting conservation on the ground. Basically, the whole idea of the stewardship program is to kind of encourage these proactive, voluntary relationships, collaborations, that will then produce these win-win solutions for landowners as well as wildlife. And so we're able to do that by putting people at the local level to kind of encourage these relationships and also act as bridges between, say, agencies as yourself and these landowners. So these positions that are at the local level, they're kind of seen as a neutral position. So it really helps encourage relationships and collaboration kind of across all stakeholder types in the area. So why are we so invested in private lands conservation? When you look at surface ownership throughout the contiguous U.S., 70% of it is privately owned. It's going to be different, you know, say in the southeast of the U.S. compared to the American West, but 70%, that's a large proportion. In the American West, when you think about wet habitats, riparian areas, wetlands, etc., you know that life follows water. So everyone, when you're talking about wildlife conservation, people are really concerned about working in these areas, ensuring these habitats are high quality. So 2% of the western landscape is identified as wet habitat. Of that 2%, 80% is located on private lands. So with the fact that life follows water, it just makes sense for us to be really out there and active and vocal about private lands conservation. Basically, there's a lot of people, a lot of organizations that are involved in private lands conservation. This is kind of the model, the approach that RMBO takes. So we really like to just start it all with a conversation. And that conversation can occur from a specific visit to a landowner's operation, landowner's ranchette, or it could be due to a workshop that, say, an RMBO biologist creates or just is part of. So we start the conversation with these landowners. And most of the time, landowners, they know they're good stewards of the land. They know that, you know, they do some amazing things. And so with this conversation, we can also provide them with simple tools. So we'll provide them with stock tank escape ladders so we can prevent, you know, the threat of drowning to species. We can give them free fence markers to mark on the fence so that it can reduce collisions, say, for sage grouse or other species. And with that, we kind of just hope the conversation continues and they could really be involved with species conservation. We can send them in a direction to all different agencies, all different organizations that are involved in habitat projects. And then also one thing that really interests me and the group is we can help economically diversify a private landowner's kind of operation. You know, I want to see, say, a rancher, I want to see that person remain on the landscape. They're great stewards of the land. They are the ranching, when done in a sustainable fashion, is the primary land use that I want to see remain on the landscape. What's good for ranching is good for wildlife habitat and wildlife in general. And so to assist in some way to economically diversify them, to ensure that in 2015 and 2020, ranching is still a viable way to make a living. An example that RMBO has been involved with is creation of this Colorado birding trail. So there's some booklets in each region. They have a northeast region, a southeast region, 4 regions of Colorado. And these landowners can say, I want to be a part of that. So people who are really interested in birdings will have that booklet, will be able to reach out to landowners in that area, and landowners will have and visit with them, and it could potentially economically diversify that area for those species. So my predecessor in this position, he really liked to call it contagious conservation. So that's kind of what we're trying to do. And in my time in South Dakota, in these rural communities, you know, word travels fast. And a lot of times for me, with people coming to me asking to be involved with, you know, habitat projects, it was word of mouth from their neighbor who was involved. And their neighbor would say, okay, why don't you go see Gillian? I'm doing this with her, and it might be helpful for you. So we're kind of, that's kind of the overarching goal, to just kind of make it contagious. So this is kind of our private lands biologist locations that we have going on right now. And what's really unique about RMBO is that we have some in Mexico. So we're focusing heavily kind of on the breeding area in the US, but we're also trying to promote good stewardship on the land in Mexico. So the wintering grounds for these birds that are in your state. So that's pretty unique about the organization. Right now, currently, you can see we have 2 positions in Wyoming. So we have Garrett Pantel, he's part of the Sage Grouse Initiative, and he is in Saratoga. His partnership is with the local conservation district, NRCS, and I think, and just us, I guess. So it's just 3 partners involved in that position. For Brandon Elkins, he is up in Gillette, Wyoming, and his partnership is between BLM, NRCS, and RMBO. And Brandon's position is really unique. It's something that I really like to see kind of grow. He's a resource for landowners to come to if they're looking at reclamation. So say they have some property that has, you know, been developed for oil and gas, and that the well has retired, they can go to Brandon and he can assist them with reseeding and stuff like that. Right here we've just got some images of projects that some of these biologists do. So the juniper removal, you folks are probably all familiar with that sort of work that goes on. This picture here is in southwestern Colorado, and it was a really neat riparian restoration that one of our biologists kind of got involved with. And you can just see the difference it made. They did some plantings of cottonwoods and willows. They did some stream bank stabilization, and we saw some really good outcomes. So we've had a lot of success with this program since kind of the beginning in 2008. And I think a lot of it relies on the fact that these positions are really able to gain the trust of landowners. They work at the local level. They kind of get to know what's really driving that local community, what's going on, gain the trust, and really create some great collaborations that in turn can allow them to leverage significant funds to get habitat on the ground. In Wyoming, the 2 partner biologists have been doing a great job. Currently, Garrett is really involved with CCAA developments for the greater sage grouse. He's putting a lot of time into that, making sure landowners are informed about that. Brandon, up in Gillette, is really active in the community, doing outreach, being involved with children's camps. So it's not only, you know, focusing on getting conservation on the ground. It's also just, you know, making people aware of what can be done for conservation. And with Brandon's position with BLM, we call them private lands wildlife biologists, but we also work with public lands. So we're not so focused only on private. We know in some areas there's those checkerboard fashion for surface ownership. So Brandon delves deeply into kind of working across those and building private-public collaboration. So future needs, you know, Nick went into detail how you folks are contributing to the science aspect. So, you know, we hope that we have continued support for that IMBCR program. Those pocket guides productions on one of the first slides I showed, you folks have contributed to that. And that is a tool for these private lands biologists to start a conversation with landowners. It's a tool for them to say, oh, you know what we were visiting about? Here's a booklet about it. So we would really enjoy to have continued support for that. And we also would like to have potential support in the future to see if we need any more boots on the ground. We're all about seeing if there's a capacity need for you folks, and just to visit with you and see how we can complement each other. The reason why we have Rock Springs in parentheses is there was a map that Nick had showed you with the species richness. And kind of in that area you saw, I guess it was a deeper green color. And so we thought, well, this might be an area where there are those sagebrush obligate species, if there's a capacity need on your side to potentially get some boots on the ground, that would be an area that may be of interest. But I think that's all. I think we might have gone over our time. But again, we thank you for your support over the years, and we thank you for having us here and visiting with you.
Questions for Gillian or Nick, I guess?
Commissioner Haley. Well, Mr. President, I'll make a statement. We've been on their list of properties they visit for some time, and I'll get a letter and I pass it on to the one that's really interested is the foreman's wife that keeps track of what birds are up on the ranch. But they're kind of a phantom group, and I'm glad to see some faces because I get notices they're going to come, and I get notices that they've been, and then the results of birds they saw, and so I'm glad to see some faces.
You get your gift?
Got my gift.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's important.
I'm reachable.
Anything else? Anybody? Excellent. That's very interesting. I guess one question is, who writes your checks? I mean, are you privately funded or are?
It's all about collaboration. So it's all about partners being involved. It's about being really active and writing proposals, say with NIFWIP. And so that's kind of one of my roles with the program manager for the stewardship team. We all work off of soft money, so and science as well. So it's time consuming, but how we get it done.
To follow up on that, I think to date, our MBO is about 90% funded by contracts and grants. From the science team, about 50% of our budget comes from the Forest Service. They've been a huge partner in regions 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's that whole 13-state region I showed. But then state wildlife grants. And we are trying to build up our development program as well. So we've actually had some very large donations from Ed Warner, all one of these big supporter of Colorado State University. So starting to get that a little bit gives us some freedom to fill in some of the gaps that sometimes it's a little hard to get a contractor a grant for.
Great.
Mr. President, just a comment, and it kind of goes along with the tank ladders and the fence marking that you supply. It'd be nice, I think, to see more emphasis, you know, and you know this well, but those steel posts that people use, those pipes that people use for fence posts and stuff, and I'm sure you know this, those things are a death trap for little birds. You know, I've over the years I've looked in many of those, you know, and they're all full of bird bones and bluebird feathers and stuff. And if there was more public awareness of the problem that those caused, and if there were more easy methods to cap those, I think we could do a good thing.
That's a good comment. That's something that we can look into, because that would be a tool for, you know, when you have a landowner visit to say, hey, if we figure out if there is a design that's good, you know, if you do this, you might be saving birds from drowning.
If they saw a few pictures of what's inside those pipes.
That really does fit perfectly in the idea of the proactive and voluntary partnerships.
Yeah, yeah.
Audubon Society, are they big with you?
We do partner with them. Audubon of the Rockies and also the Wyoming Audubon Society.
Cool.
President Cloud, I guess I will make a comment. Uh, we run cattle over in the western part of the state and have a number of wells that pump into tanks and stuff. And I see that you supply escape routes for those. One of the things that we've done just recently, they provided those, the NRCS provided us some of those about 5, maybe 6 years ago. Put them in the tanks, about 3 of them. They're a little wire mesh thing. But these things were painted mild steel, and the water is kind of saline in a lot of those tanks. And in that period of time, a lot of those have got pretty well rotted. The pinhole, the paint, then the saline water gets in and does it. One of the things we've done, we built a series of 3 tanks last year. We put stainless steel in those. It's about twice the cost, but I think it'll last a lot longer.
No, that's good. I mean, that's good to hear stuff because we need to know, kind of from a landowner with the fence markers. I've had a landowner ask, is it going to rust out my fence if I have this, marker on the fence for 10 years? I don't want to be fixing the fence. And so, I went to people who had markers on their fence for 8 years, and they said there were some people in Oklahoma and Kansas that I guess started a while ago. We haven't had an issue, but it's good to hear stuff like that from you folks because we want to make sure we're promoting stuff that's not going to be extra labor for you, that's going to sustain.
Well, they do work, no doubt about it. They work. But like I say, the mild steel ones rust out. Plastic ones might work. Stainless steel is what we're working with now.
I'll go write that down in my notebook. So.
Okay, thank you.
President Cloner? I see on your website you got a South Dakota breeding bird atlas. Is there one for Wyoming?
It's a great question. I think Wyoming is one of 2 or 3 states in the nation that has never had a breeding bird atlas occur. One of the struggles is with the relatively low population and not that many bird watchers. A volunteer effort hasn't been possible. What we've done in the South Dakota breeding bird atlas is it's about a 1/3 paid, 2/3 volunteer operation. And actually, Andrea Orabona, the non-game biologist for the state, and myself submitted a state wildlife grant last year or the year before to try to start up a breeding bird atlas. And unfortunately, that wasn't funded at the time. And I think it was viewed favorably, but budgets are tight. So it's definitely something that we would like to pursue.
Would the Outlaw Inn like to fund one of those? Just ask.
I still got to pay for these fishing poles. I don't know how much.
How did you think of that?
Well, it was a great presentation, very informative. It's every couple of months we find somebody comes in here we've never heard of, and it's like I said, it's very interesting. And your work, I know, Bob, I'm sure you can attest, it's greatly appreciated, I think, for our efforts. And keep up the good work. Thank you. You can come back anytime. Glad to have you. An added agenda item. I think we're going to hear briefly from Carrie and Keith prior to the director's report on WAFWA. You can go wherever you want.
Thank you, President Clouda, Commissioners, Director Talbot. A few years ago when Commissioner Clark was president of the commission, and he was divvying up positions between the 3 of us who had come on, between the Predator Board and Brucellosis Task Force and WAFWA, I said, well, how many meetings do each of them have? And WAFWA had the least. So, and he knew I had a busy schedule, so that's the one I got. And I travel a lot anyway, so it was easy for me, and I did it. But I just wanted to say that it's been a great experience. And I've enjoyed going, and as the lead, I make sure that I go to the two meetings, winter and the summer one in July, and Keith has agreed to, or Commissioner Culver has agreed to, come as well so that he takes over that position. And I hope as a commission that as the new members come on, that particularly Commissioner Anselmi and Keith and Commissioner Culver will encourage one of them to then take that secondary position and keep it going, because that continuity, I think that Commissioner Culver would already say, having been to two, right? Three now, that you get to know the other commissioners and you start to hear the same things that they're dealing with that we are, or new ones and different ones, and it's good to work together. So that's my little forward speech. I'll give you a brief overview of some of the states and what they talked about, and hopefully I'll actually get a little bigger one typed up. I didn't do a very good job with the July one, but so we went down to Las Vegas because Nevada is hosting it this year, which meant that the winter meeting is in Las Vegas, and their summer meeting will be in Reno. And in 2016, Wyoming will be hosting it. So the winter meeting will be in San Diego, and the summer meeting, which is in July, will be in Cody. Arizona, they had an interesting one. They commented on a female gray wolf that had shown up on their north rim. And the Arizona commissioners had gone out on a tour to, they didn't expect to see the wolf. They heard about it. Several people had seen it. There had been pictures in the paper and things like that. And they were touring some other things. But lo and behold, on their during their tour, they run into this female wolf. And they park along the roadway, and she meanders around the roadway for about 15 minutes, and they take pictures and all these kind of things. They found it rather interesting, and one of the commissioners, Robert Manzel, later wrote an article for the paper, and he said it was quite clear she was very gentle, he was sure had been planted. She was very used to people. It was quite obvious that that was the situation, and so trying to move them into other areas by saying they're native. They did their second transplant of desert sheep this year up by Tucson, and their biggest problem up there is mountain lions getting into them. They planted 30 the first year, 30 the second year, and they have a third year that they're going to plant 30. And they have had to do some mountain lion control, but other than that, it's going very well. Nevada, one of their big things is trapping, and a lot of people trying to change some of those regulations. That got put on hold. But what they were looking at was putting into the regulations marking traps. Their trappers don't have to do that. They also have they're presently a 96-hour time limit that before they have to check their traps, and around the urban areas they're wanting them to reduce that. In Idaho, the wolf count's up to about 1,000, and they had only gotten about 200 so far in the 2014 hunting season, but they're having a lot of difficulty actually getting a true count. I mean, 1,000 is what they've counted, but they said that the U.S. Forest Service doesn't allow them to do any data collection up in the Forest Service. So you can fly over. I guess they can't stop you from flying over, but you can't do any landing, you can't do any collaring, you can't do any of those kind of things. They don't allow it, and they said that's where probably most of them are. So they were really working on trying to get an opportunity to do that. Also, in Idaho, the department and the individual commissioners are presently being sued in regard to trapping being allowed for them. So a lot of these other states commissioners were targeted more than we have been so far in Wyoming. They actually have a landowner appreciation program
where landowners get a large degree of tag. And they had one landowner who has like 50,000 acres. He gets like about 24 licenses. And he had 12 deer and 12 elk licenses, and he wanted more. So a couple of the commissioners kind of led the charge of, no, you got enough, you don't get any more. So we were shown a very expensive sign this guy had made that he has now posted out at the end of his entrance to his property, which said that he no longer was no hunting on this property because of commissioners so-and-so and so-and-so. Anyway, we don't have that problem. Colorado, I thought this was interesting. They have landowner tags that they can sell. And they've been doing this for 15 years. Most of them go to non-residents, and they sell them for a big amount of money, and we know what our commissioner tags go for. But then that money is kept by the landowner. And it's a money-making thing for their ag people there. They said it was a great program, and it did bring the hunters in, so they had just renewed it for another five years. They do it on a 5-year increment. And I thought this was interesting that we got this brochure yesterday from Rennie, because Colorado Group had done a brochure just on mule deer, and they presented it around. They didn't have enough for us to bring home, so I don't have an example for you, but yours is way better. So this was really good. I thought next year when we have it printed, or this summer, we'll have to take it. Utah had to have a count of about 4,000 bears. Now, bears being a big problem for them, and they had just passed a rule to allow baiting and shooting off the base to try to make some control. They were having a lot of discussion about females and whether to be able to hunt them. So I was glad that we can still do that, even if it limits the quota being met every year, possibly. South Dakota, they had just found juvenile mussels in Angostura, which is right next to the eastern border of Wyoming, and the South Dakota commissioners were extremely concerned by the idea that their department had not done the kind of work that the Wyoming department had in terms of aquatic invasive species. And we did talk, it was the deputy director, right? There a little bit after.
Mostly I visited with Gary Jensen, a commissioner.
Right, okay, well, and the deputy director was there. Commissioner Culver might have been off on another conversation, but he wasn't interested at all. They could not get him interested. He's, no big problem. They're juveniles. They probably won't reproduce. I said, do you think they don't grow up or what? I don't know. I don't understand that. So the commissioners were big on it. They wanted to get involved. They wanted to get some of this going. And I would just like to say that our they've reached out to Wyoming's Commissioner Culver, put them in connection with Chief of Fisheries, and our department is actually helping the commissioners because they're leading the charge with their department. So being there and being able to work together, I just wanted to express an example of why it was important to be able to be talking to those commissioners in other areas. Mountain lions, obviously Wyoming has worked with South Dakota in terms of mountain lion hunting. They do not, on the plains areas of South Dakota, allow hunting with hounds, and a lot of the landowners there are wanting to do that, so that is something that's being talked about. We, every time you go to a meeting, you develop discussion points, and then those are worked on for the next meeting. You usually pick 2 or 3 discussion points. And so one of them that they had for this meeting was on wild horses and burros, and which is a significant problem. And while we talk about having a problem here, the nationwide problem was unbelievable. And just a couple brief things. In 2012, the population, these are on BLM lands, of course, but the population of wild horses and burros nationwide, or in the western states, was 37,293. These were the ones out in the wild. In holding on that same year, there were 46,249. And that year, 2012, removals were 8,522. In 2014, the population outside is now 49,209. In holding, 48,258, and removals, 1,863. They figure that they grow by 25% per year, and those numbers that I just gave you of nearly 50,000 outside and nearly 50,000 in holding should double in 4 years. So it's a significant problem, and Wyoming has been able to deal with it actually better than most. We didn't start with as many too. Another thing that was talked about, and I thought it was interesting to see Governor Friedenthal there last night, but they actually have started a blue ribbon panel, and the goal of this panel is to create a funding partnership across North America, to create a construct to work on towards perhaps having other stakeholders invest in wildlife and the appropriate ways to do that. And the co-chairs on that are Governor Friedenthal and Johnny Morris, who's the CEO of Bass Pro Shop. And then there are a whole list of other people. So we are still working on things like that. And then our discussion points for the summer WAFWA, which are coming up, is Arizona is going to lead the discussion on youth recruitment and license fee changes, some things that they've been working on in their state. Nevada is going to talk about desert and Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep, and the population increases and what they're doing there. And Utah is going to discuss squatters of the U.S. and have an update on that. Also, one more thing, and I told Rennie this yesterday, but I think he's doing a fantastic job. Really a fantastic job. But I also had a compliment that we received from Robert Manzel, one of the Arizona commissioners, who has his name on the list. And so when Rennie's sending out that blanket list of emails and getting all of that information, Robert is getting that too. And he said, "Oh my gosh, your new communications guy is unbelievable." So, FYI, you guys, don't let him talk to people in Arizona. We don't want to lose him. So, I don't know if Commissioner Culver has anything like that.
Just one thing. It's like Commissioner Little, I've enjoyed getting to know the other commissioners from the other states, as well as their department employees. I found it interesting as they were going around the table giving commissioner reports. One commissioner from another state spent most of his time talking about how he enjoyed coming up to Wyoming and hunting. He was very complimentary of our wildlife resource and very envious. Another commissioner then piped up that he also comes to Wyoming and hunts. And over the years he's met and had encounters with 5 of our different game wardens. And he said every one of them has been polite and respectful, and he said, and they really look sharp in those red shirts. He said he liked those red shirts.
Thanks, Mary. That was good. Appreciate that.
Do you wear your green jackets when you're down there?
No.
At WAFWA?
No, we don't. I guess we could.
Director, I guess you're next.
Mr. President, members of the commission, just a quick summary of the director's report. I certainly appreciate the commission's engagement in WAFWA. There's actually a lot of policy that's established for the western states, and sage grouse is one of the many things, but I think it's important that we be engaged in those issues on a regional and as well as a national basis. While we were in Las Vegas, right now I am the chairman of the Colorado River Fish and Wildlife Council, and that council took a tour of Lake Mead. And while we were at Lake Mead, we actually, and I thought I was going to have Chief of Fisheries Fowden decontaminated because they pulled a boat out that had quagga mussels on it, and it was quite impressive what kind of a problem that actually is. And they had an individual there with a high pressure sprayer, and he had been working on that boat, and they anticipated it would take 3.5 days to decontaminate that boat. But there were literally millions of mussels on that boat, and as they washed them off, they smelled a little fishy as well. Not a business that we want to get into for sure, but to see that firsthand, and that boat had been out of the water for about 3 days, and all those mussels were live on there, and spraying them off, and it takes a little bit to get them off of there. So it was good. It was good to see that firsthand. So while I was in WAFWA in Las Vegas, I had the opportunity to meet with my counterparts from Idaho and Montana and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to urge them very firmly to move forward with grizzly bear delisting. And myself and Chief Nesvik will be going down to Denver on February 18th or 19th, right in there, to meet with the service again. Governor Meade has met with the other two governors, Idaho and Montana, and the service, and the service continues to delay a delisting rule on grizzly bears. And from our perspective, grizzly bears met the delisting criteria in 2003. We had a rule that we moved forward with in 2007. The courts rejected that based on the adequate habitat assessment for whitebark pine. That work has been completed, and we feel very strongly that we need to move forward with delisting. So between that and sage grouse, the Wyoming continues to be the lead in the sage grouse planting efforts. Mary showed you had a presentation on the data that Wyoming has put forth, but Nevada, while we were there, the host state president was gone most of the time. He was at the Nevada governor's office, and they were in the process of largely redoing their plan because the service said that if Nevada did not get on board with what they call resource allocation, which is our core area strategy, they were probably going to list the bird. And so they were totally redoing their sage grouse plan, and I know that the governor's office and also Bob Budd were going to try to work with them to bring their plan up to par so that the service was happy with that. There's been, since we last met, there's been 2 fairly significant resignations or retirements in Wyoming. Don Simpson with the BLM moved on. He retired, and they're in the process of finding a new state director. Don worked with us on a lot of issues, and while we didn't agree all the time, certainly able to keep a good dialogue going with him. So very interested in who they will be replacing him with, and certainly a person that we as an agency need to have a positive working relationship with. Jason Fernio with the Department of Ag moved on. He is now the Assistant Secretary for the Texas Department of Agriculture, and Doug Miyamoto has taken his position. Doug is a great guy, a Wyoming kid with an ag background, and we'll be looking forward to working with him. A lot of legislative issues going on, and we've spent a huge amount of time preparing legislative information sheets and fiscal notes on roughly about 40 bills at this point, and that will be largely a huge challenge for us as we continue toward the March meeting. We have invited the new committee to go on a tour of our Sabile facility, and hopefully we'll be able to get that put together and get those folks out on a weekend and let them know part of what we do as an agency, and we did that in the past. So that will, looking forward to that. Those folks seem very open and receptive to game and fish, and we're looking forward to working with them as we go move forward. Other than that, Mr. President, Mr. Nesvik made a comment about the fact that I was spineless. So since our last meeting, I took 2 weeks and went down. I got about $28,000 worth of titanium put in my back, and it seems to work pretty well. But with that, thank you very much. Any questions?
One question, Scott, on the department-wide webcast, which I find pretty informative, I think, and they seem to come about the right time. Any chance maybe of hosting one of those immediately after the legislative session, if you've got all the information compiled about maybe what has affected us and not, and what went away, and with that,
Mr. President, members of the commission, absolutely. And we've been trying to host those to keep folks updated, and attendance at those is actually quite good. I think the last time we figured that we had maybe 200 people between the regional offices and folks that have logged on. It's a great opportunity to provide information. Unfortunately, I don't think it's a real good opportunity for dialogue, because when there's 200 people logged on, folks are a little shy about questions. But it does provide an excellent opportunity to provide information, and we'll do that. So thank you for that. Other questions?
Anything else for the director?
Mike, Aaron, thanks again for your service, and it's been a pleasure.
See you around.
Yes, we will.
With that, I think that I would entertain a motion to approve the November 2014 commission meeting minutes.
So moved.
Commissioner Haley moved, Commissioner Price seconded. All for the question, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
I've got a question. On one of those particular, I can't remember what it is right now. We did an amendment, and then we didn't close that. Did that get changed?
You may have to be just a hair more specific if you're talking to me.
Yes, I read it, and Carolyn did change it.
Okay.
So,
She just made the.
and it looked okay.
Okay. I got back kind of slow, and I went through things pretty fast.
It was reporting an amendment to a motion.
Right. Yeah. I remember that, and now that we got that narrowed down, and I remember it was corrected.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're due to gather again. Keith is going to drive home and find Sherry a phone number to call to get us some rooms in a meeting room. And so that will be in Newcastle. Mike and Aaron, thank you guys very much for your leadership and love for Wyoming's wildlife. We appreciate it. I know it was tough a couple of times dealing with somebody like me, but that's life. And we're going to move on based on the sage advice that we received from you. So thank you very much. And with that, goodbye. We're done. Drive careful. I'm sorry. Did anybody? Did you guys have anything to say? Everybody okay?
You did that.
All right.
Neil, come on. You got a speech, don't you?
Maybe not.